Good morning. Good morning. Okay, today we're going to talk about Reagan Hancock, the wife, the mother, her life, and the tragedy. But here's the thing about this case. Reagan does not need to be remembered for the tragedy of what took her life. She needs to be remembered for the beautiful person she was, for the family she created, for what she brought to the rest of her family. She was a beautiful person. But we also want to talk about what happened that nobody's talking about. The other part of the story that nobody is talking about, and that is Homer. Homer, the husband of um, Reagan. So Homer, bless his heart, he did not want to be involved in the Material Instinct show, and he chose not to be. He chose to keep his private life. He is in a battle for what's right. That is the fact that he has sued. So let me pull this up. Homer Hancock has filed suit against Griffin, against Wade Griffin et al. Okay? And there's a very interesting reason why, and I don't blame him. Hey there, Sprinkle, good to see you, girl. You know, I saw your message, but it was pretty late. I was going to contact you this afternoon to talk about what day you're off and all that so we can, plan for the next few days. Because we need to. But anyway, hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing well. So there is a lawsuit that was filed by Homer um, Hancock, and it was a wrongful death suit. And I'm going to pull that up, and we're going to talk about that. So let me pull this up. Hang on a second. I want to pull up the actual suit that was filed. Okay, hang on a minute, guys. Well, come on. Let's see if I can get it right here. All right, here we go. Now, let me share my screen with you so you can see what I'm seeing. Yeah, Thursday, Friday's perfect. Well, have a good day while you're out there at work today. I know you don't really want to do it, but I know you have to, and so I get it. So here we go. This is the actual wrongful death lawsuit that was filed on 10/6 of 2022. And it is Homer Hancock, individually and as next friend of Braxton Sage Hancock, deceased, versus Taylor Morton Parker and Wade Griffin in the District Court of Bowie County, Texas. There's a special place in hell for Taylor Parker. I will tell you that, folks. There is. Because what she did to that family, there is no grace, there is no mercy, there is nothing that she could ever say or do that can change the feelings, how any of us feel about what she did. Now let's go ahead and look at this lawsuit. Oops, sorry, there it is. Yeah. So I don't blame him, because let me tell you something about this case that I don't think people realize, and that is the fact that on October the 7th, Taylor Parker and Reagan had a girls' day out. They were friends, or they thought they were friends. She thought they were friends. They were both pregnant. They were sharing a story together. And on October the 8th, Mr. Homer comes home from work. They have their dinner. And then Taylor visits to give Reagan a baby present for Braxton. So this is the 7th, this is the 8th. And then on October the 9th, she shows up over there after Homer has left to go to work and takes the life of Reagan and attempts to steal Braxton and takes the baby's life as well. So that is some very important parts of this story. And let's talk about this lawsuit. Okay, so let me pull this back up. So this was filed in Bowie County, Texas, against Taylor Morton Parker and Wade Griffin as defendants. Here's another little part about this story that people do not realize, and that is the fact that Stephanie Ott had a phone call with Griffin's mother, and then to let her know that she knew that Taylor was not pregnant. And so Griffin's mother, several of Griffin's friends knew that Taylor was not pregnant. There was no way she could be pregnant. Okay? They all knew it. But he chose to ignore this. Okay? She sets the house on fire, thinking that's going to, pull him away from knowing that she's faking this. And she did all kinds of things. See, her lying is not just new. Her lying was from years and years and years. But there's also another little part of the story, and I will never ever give Taylor Parker an out. I will never give her mercy. Although I will tell you this, and this is something I've discovered from reviewing all the paperwork, etc. When Taylor Parker was in the hospital having a surgery from her tubal pregnancy that she had. It was not supposed to happen. She was actually asleep. Her mother, Shanna Pryor, and her husband at that time, Tommy, made the decision for her to do the hysterectomy and remove her uterus, etc. She never planned that. Yeah, the bomb threat at the hospital. You're right. She never planned that. She never planned for that. But they made the decision while she was asleep. So that is the fact that people need to pay attention to. So let me tell you something that happens, and this is nothing to give mercy to her. But when you are thrown into basically menopause at a very young age, it does mess up your mind. I'm sure she went and got no help at all, not realizing that she's actually now been thrown into menopause at that age. Okay, so that is one thing that did happen, and that is true. Now, another part to that is she did not blame her mother for signing that paperwork or helping that decision be made, but she did blame Tommy, her husband. Okay, so that's another part of something that happened here. Now, let's go ahead and finish looking at this lawsuit. Now, plaintiff intends the discovery to be conducted under discovery level 2. The parties, let's go down to jurisdiction venue. The subject matter is in controversies within the jurisdictional limits of this court. The court has jurisdiction over the parties because the defendant Parker and defendant Griffin are Texas residents, and the venue in Bowie County is proper in this cause under section 15.002 of the Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code because of all the substantial parts of the events, omissions giving rise to this lawsuit occurred in this county. Now let's talk about the facts. On October the 9th, 2020, defendant Parker drove to plaintiff's home in New Boston, Texas in defendant Griffin's 2009 Toyota Corolla, killed the plaintiff's wife, Reagan Simmons Hancock, and cut baby Hancock from Reagan's body. Defendant Parker then took baby Hancock, who the jury Bowie County had determined was still alive, and fled the scene in defendant Griffin's vehicle toward Oklahoma. Defendant Parker was eventually stopped for speeding and driving erratically by a Texas state trooper, who upon approaching the vehicle reportedly observed baby Hancock on defendant Parker's lap. Baby Hancock was later pronounced dead, and the vehicle was driven by the defendant Parker at all times during this occurrence. Above was registered to defendant Parker's boyfriend, Griffin. Now let's talk about the negligence here. Plaintiff incorporates the proceedings paragraphs above references as fully stated herein. The defendant Parker had a duty to exercise the degree of care that reasonably carefully person could use to avoid harm to others under circumstances like those described herein. Baby Hancock's injuries were approximately caused by defendant Parker's negligent, careless, and reckless disregard of said duty while driving a vehicle upon the roadway. The negligent, careless, reckless disregard of duty of defendant Parker while operating a motor vehicle included but is not limited to the following acts of omissions. Defendant Parker failed to keep a proper lookout for baby Hancock's safety that would have been maintained by a person of ordinary prudence under the same or similar circumstances. Defendant Parker failed to stay in proper lanes, instead driving recklessly upon the roadway, swerving and driving left to the center, narrowly avoiding a collision with another vehicle. Defendant Parker failed to control the speed of the vehicle upon the roadway, driving at speeds greater than is reasonable and prudent under the circumstances, and/or defendant Parker failed to keep her vehicle under proper control and operate in a safe manner upon the roadway. Defendant Parker's negligence, carelessness, and recklessness while driving a vehicle upon the roadway approximately caused baby Hancock's injuries, which resulted in the death of baby Hancock. Therefore, defendant Parker is liable for damages within the jurisdictional limits of this court arising from the injuries that subsequently caused baby Hancock's death. Number 2, wrongful death claim against defendant Parker. Plaintiff incorporates the proceedings paragraphs above the reference is fully stated herein. Plaintiff is the surviving parent of baby Hancock. Defendant Parker's breach of her own duty to baby Hancock approximately caused baby Hancock's death. Number 18, death. Defendant Parker's wrongful act, negligence, neglect, and carelessness, and recklessness while driving a vehicle upon the roadway was producing cause of baby Hancock's death. Number 19, therefore, the defendant Parker is liable for damages within the jurisdictional limits of this court arising from the injuries that subsequently caused baby Hancock's death. Number 3, or count 3, negligent entrustment claim against Wade Griffin. Now, this is the very important part here because she is suing Wade Griffin, and they have every right to sue Wade Griffin because he did provide her with a car. She was driving his vehicle. He was believing that she was pregnant against everybody telling him no, she wasn't. He would not believe any of these people. He wanted to believe her. Now, when you listen to him tell his story, he talks like, oh, well, he tried to, or he gives all these excuses about the situation between him and Parker. Okay, now let's go back and finish reading this. Plaintiff incorporates the preceding paragraphs above referenced is as fully stated herein. On October the 9th, 2020, Defendant Griffin was the registered owner of the vehicle operated by the Defendant Parker. Defendant Griffin entrusted the vehicle to Defendant Parker, who he knew to be a reckless and incompetent driver, who used his vehicle to engage in torturous acts, who used his vehicle to flee the scene of a crime while speeding and driving recklessly upon the roadway and approximately causing the death of baby Hancock. Defendant Griffin has testified that prior to permitting Parker the use of his vehicle was a liar. To be unstable, he described as engaged in emotional roller coasters that resulted in him not functioning well at work and being depressed and overwhelmed. Defendant Griffin knew or through the exercise of reasonable care should have known that the defendant Parker was a reckless and incompetent driver prior to permitting her to operate this vehicle. As described herein, Defendant Parker was negligent, careless, and reckless while driving Defendant Griffin's vehicle upon the roadway on the occasion in question. Defendant Parker's negligence was the proximate cause of plaintiff's damages and is thereby imputed the Defendant Griffin as the registered owner of the vehicle, having entrusted the vehicle to Defendant Parker. Damages. This is number 26. As a direct and proximate result of the occurrence made the basis of this lawsuit, plaintiff Homer Hancock, individually and as next friend of Braxton Sage Hancock, deceased, was caused to suffer damages within the jurisdictional limits of this court, to which claimants live entitled. Economical damages, funeral costs and other out-of-pocket expenses, and loss of services. Non-economic damages, mental anguish in the past, mental anguish in the future, pain and suffering in the past, pain and suffering in the future, and loss of love, companionship, society, and comfort. Exemplary damages. Defendant's conduct, as described above, constitutes the type of conduct for which exemplary damages may be awarded in that it grossly is negligent, and therefore plaintiff seeks exemplary damages in the amount to be determined by the trier of the facts. Plaintiff demands a jury trial and tenders the appropriate fee with this petition. Prayer. Wherefore, plaintiff Homer Hancock, individually and as next of friend of Braxton Sage Hancock, deceased, respectfully prays the Defendant Parker and Defendant Griffin to be cited to appear and answer herein upon final hearings of this cause. Judgment to be entered for plaintiff against defendants jointly and severally for damages in the amount within the jurisdictional limits of this court. Exemplary damages as addressed to each defendant per section 41.006, chapter 41 of the Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code, excluding interest and is allowed by section 41.008, chapter 41 of Texas Civil Practice and Remedies Code, together with prejudgment interest from the date of the injury through the date of the judgment and the maximum rate allowed by law, post-judgment interest at the legal rate, cost of court, and such other and further relief which the plaintiff may be entitled to at law or in equity. Now, that is the lawsuit filed by Homer, which is the husband and the father. Now, this lawsuit is not settled. They are still fighting this out. They're still fighting. And you know what? And I don't blame him. I would have filed the suit as well. I certainly would have. There's also some other things going on in this case that people don't really talk about, but maybe, and I understand that when they did the Netflix movie, they could only put so much information in there. Then you had a lot of family members who wanted nothing to do with it. Homer walked away. He said, "No way, I don't want nothing to do with this." He wanted to protect his private life, and I don't blame him. Okay. Um, there are a lot of members of Taylor's family that were really not interested in this at all. And then let's talk about Wade Griffin. Well, actually, what we're going to go do first is we're going to go back to the probable cause statement. I have that right here now. In the probable cause statement, let me just read this to you. The affidavit was filed after the October 9, 2020 murder of Reagan Michelle Simpson Hancock and the removal of her unborn child, according to the affidavit and subsequent court records. Reagan's mother found her deceased inside this New Boston home. Investigators reported extensive blood evidence throughout the residence and a large abdominal wound. Now, let me tell you what else that I discovered listening to some other people. The fingernails. Reagan had a fingernail missing. Fingernail was actually found in the placenta that was still attached to the baby. She was fighting to stop that bitch from taking her baby till the very last minute. She knew, she was very aware of what was happening to her. And that is so horrific, it's even hard to say. But this is true. This is part of the evidence that was found. A Texas DPS trooper stopped Parker shortly afterward in DeKalb, Texas. Investigators reported that a newborn infant was in Parker's lap with the umbilical cord still attached. Medical personnel later determined that Parker had not recently given birth. The affidavit states that Parker had told numerous people she was pregnant, held a gender reveal party, and claimed she was preparing to deliver this baby. Investigators later uncovered evidence that Parker allegedly fabricated the pregnancy and had researched childbirth cesarean procedures before the crime. Now this is true. Now I'm gonna go over here to this timeline thing from the affidavit itself. All right. Okay, let's go back over here. Now this, and it's absolutely just who goes and has a day out with a friend who's pregnant, just having a socializing day, having fun, just a girl's day out. Then goes to dinner or goes to their house the night before, takes them a baby present, and then kills them the next day and steals the baby. What kind of a deranged person are we talking about? Well, we know that Miss Taylor is a sociopath. We do know that. That's already been proved, right? Now, I'm going to go back over here to something. Let me pull my Gmail up, and we're gonna look at something over here. Hang on, just a second, guys. Okay, let me get this over here. I have some information that I went and hang on, went and pulled up and sent to myself so we could take a look at it. Okay, in my inbox here, pull up my email. I know a lot of people have talked about this case. There's been creator talking about it. But the thing is, I really want people to understand. I don't want her remembered for the fact that Taylor Parker is infamous because she took her life. That's not what I want people to remember. I want her remembered because she was a beautiful person. She had a life. She was a good mother. And her own mother says that when she originally found out she was pregnant as a young person, they weren't sure that she should keep the baby, or that they were kind of having issues, not real sure about her being a mom. But as soon as that baby was born and her family watched her be a mom, her mother knew that was the right thing, that she was a mom at heart. She had always been ready to be a mom, and that's hard to say for young people. Okay, where's my little, go find my little thing here. Hang on a second, guys. Let's see. There's my email here. Let me get this pulled up down here. Okay, all mail, here we go. Now, let's KTL News. All right, I'll go back over here and pull this one up. Okay, all mail. Okay, let me get this right here so I can get this pulled up for us. Oh my goodness, my goodness. All right, just a second. I think it popped into social. I hope not, but we'll see. Okay, well, I don't know what the hell. Okay. Oops, stop that. Stop. Hang on a minute. Mm-hmm. Well, no, dang it. Where is my little? All right, hang on a second. I might have to go pull it. Let me just get it from right here. It's not a big deal, because I don't. I've already read the one thing I wanted to read. So let's go back over here to KPSLA, which has a lot of this information about this. Hang on a second. What law? There's a lawsuit. Let's go on down. Okay. Now, I don't want to look at that anymore. There is also, the Taylor Parker. Her own mother describes the fact that she was a liar from the time that she was very, very young. But hang on a minute. Let me pull this up right over here. Okay. Let me pull this up. They discuss her as a young child. Hang on. I'm talking about Reagan now. Okay. And her compliments that she made from the day, from being a young child all the way through the time of her death. There was multiple family members, especially her mother, Jessica Brooks, and her sister, Emily Shirley, have spoken openly about Reagan's first daughter, Kinley. Now, let's talk about Kinley for a moment, because sadly, Kinley heard all of this going on. Kinley was hiding under a bed as this bitch is in there killing her mother and cutting out the baby. I am hoping and praying that Kinley did not walk out and see any of that. I'm hoping and praying that that child just stayed under the bed and did not see any of that, because that would be something that every time she closed her eyes, she would relive. Young children do not know what to do with that kind of information, okay? And Reagan became a mom at 17 and then just embraced it fully. Her family initially struggled with the news, but quickly realized she was a natural mother. Jessica and Marcus Brooks changed their mind when they saw what a dedicated natural mother Reagan was. So let's look at the Yahoo story about that. Hang on, guys. Pull this up. Now, let me share my screen so you can see what I'm looking at. There we go. All right. All right. So where is Reagan Simmons Hancock family now? Inside their life after Taylor Parker murdered her and kidnapped the unborn baby. Now look at this beautiful wedding picture. She's so happy. It is just horrible what happened to her. But here we go. Okay. Need to know. Reagan Simmons Hancock was a mother who was pregnant with her second child. She had a close relationship with her mother, Jessica Brooks, and her sister, Emily Shirley. Reagan was, okay, we know what happened there, but Reagan was a beloved daughter, sister, and wife. She was raised in a small town in Texas and had close relationships with her mom, Jessica Brooks, her stepfather, Marcus Brooks, and her sister, Emily Shirley. When she was 17 years old, Reagan welcomed her daughter kindly. Although her parents were initially hesitant to accept their daughter's decision to raise the baby, Jessica and Marcus changed their minds when they saw that a dedicated natural mother Reagan was. The young mom later met Homer Hancock, who she eventually married, and she soon became pregnant with their child. Now, the thing about Homer Hancock and Reagan is they were together 5 years before they ever even got married. So, I mean, they had a long relationship, and they chose to have a baby. They wanted to have this child. In the midst of all the excitement, Reagan befriended her wedding photographer, Taylor Parker, who told her that she was pregnant around the same time. However, Parker was actually faking this pregnancy and lying to her boyfriend, Wade Griffin, and his family and friends. Now, we know what happened on October the 9th. I'm not going to discuss that again. Parker was arrested, and we know that she was charged with capital murder. Now, Reagan's sister, mother, and stepfather all spoke about Reagan's legacy and her tragic death in the Netflix documentary about maternal instinct. Because, see, her legacy is what's important. It's not what took her out, it's the legacy that she left. All about her. Reagan's family, Reagan, that's what's important. Reagan was born on November the 4th, 1998, in Hope, Arkansas, to parents Jessica and Brandon Simmons. And this was according to her obituary. When her parents split, they both got remarried, and Jessica and Marcus and Brandon to Kristen. Now, Reagan also had a blended family with her sisters Emily and Destiny Brooks and brothers Clayton Brooks and Sawyer Simmons. Reagan became a mother when she was 17 years old and welcomed her daughter kindly. In 2020, she became pregnant with her second child, with her daughter, with a daughter, with her husband, Homer. It was like she was always meant to be a mother. That was her thing. Her stepfather, Marcus, said in Maternal Instincts that she was the best mother that I think I've ever met. Jessica spoke to people about her daughter's legacy and said that Reagan was a mama bear who was inseparable from her baby. They were each other's world from the beginning, Jessica shared. The mom remembers some of her favorite memories with her daughter in an interview with the Texarkana magazine in January 2026. Reagan always had the biggest heart. This is Jessica. But she could be a little spitfire too. She was sweet as sugar one minute and all attitude the next. On the morning of October the 9th, Homer knew that something was wrong when he was receiving strange texts from Reagan's phone and she wouldn't pick up his calls. This wasn't the way she talked, he testified. Around 10 a.m., Jessica arrived at Reagan's home in New Boston, Texas to check on her after Homer expressed his concerns, and then they tragically found what had happened. And this is her mother says, I knew she was gone. Reagan, it's Mama. Talk to me, please. She didn't answer. Jessica recalled during her testimony, I said, somebody has taken my baby. She's gone. And there is blood everywhere. Somebody needs to come. Jessica calls her husband, Marcus, who also went to the crime scene and helped retrieve toddler Cunley, who was hiding under the sheets in a bed. Okay, not under the bed, but under the sheets in a bed. It's so hard to put into words what losing a child is like. Jessica reflected in Maternal Instincts while later adding, half of me died, and that's not coming back. The Jessica that I used to be is gone, and the part that's left is part that I never knew was there. Now I'm going to read this and then we'll talk. After an intense trial, Parker was sentenced. While addressing the court on Reagan's day of sentencing, Jessica called Parker an evil piece of flesh demon. This is from the Texarkana Gazette and reported at the time. Okay, now I'm going to give y'all something right. This is going to be a trigger warning right here, okay? Trigger warning. While addressing the court, my baby was alive, still fighting for her babies when you tore her open and ripped her baby from her stomach. After the sentencing, Jessica said the family was glad justice had been served, not only for our family, our friends, and the prosecution team, but our community. Okay, Bowie is a very, very small town in Texas. My husband's grandparents lived there. And so we've been there many, many times before they passed away. It's a very small town. But it's a fun little town. They had something called First Fridays or First Saturdays, and it's just a great fun to go up there and go to that. But anyway, I'm overwhelmed with happiness it's over because she has been a burden in our life for so long now that I haven't been able to think about my sister without thinking about her. Where's Reagan's family now? In the years since Reagan's tragic death, her family members have not gone back to normal, but have tried to strengthen as a family. Jessica explains to Texarkana magazine. Jessica has leaned on her faith and tried to accept the grief. There is a constant battle between good and evil in the world, and we don't see and know that God didn't do this. She told the outlet while later adding, you're going to grieve off and on for the rest of your life. You have to let yourself. While living through the tragedy, Jessica has embraced the joy that's been getting to see Reagan's daughter, Kinley, who resembles her mother. Oh, that kid, she's a mess. She is so much like Reagan, she judged. We remind Kinley all the time what a good mommy she had. We would be doing we would be doing an injustice to Reagan if we didn't. Both Jessica and Emily appeared in Maternal Instincts and reflected on how their lives have changed. For Emily, she admitted that she was scared to hire a wedding photographer since that's how Reagan and Parker met. Emily married on the same day as Reagan and Homer's wedding. Okay, Emily marries on the same day as Reagan and Homer's wedding anniversary and later welcomed a daughter named Paisley Michelle, who has the same middle name as Reagan. While Emily told people that she was working on a new legislation to protect pregnant women, so her sister's murder will not have been in vain. So there you go. That is the story for her family now. I think that's a beautiful story, and I'm glad that they're talking about her and sharing things about her young life and when she became a mother and about her daughter as as Kinley, as she grows up and becomes a woman herself. So many times the focus of every story is the murderer, not their victims. I mean, let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about um, Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell. Let's talk about that because it's Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell. What about JJ, Tyler, Charles? What about all of the people whose lives they took? Tammy, those people are important. They don't need to be forgotten. They need to be remembered every day of of the rest of their life of the people who are their kin. They need to be remembered. They don't need to be forgotten. They need to be talked about. I'm so happy to see Colby Ryan with his channel talk about his family members, talk about those children, and not talk about her because they are the important ones, not Charles, not um, day bells. Those are the ones that we don't need to talk about. It doesn't even matter what's happening to them anymore. They are right where they need to be. No, he will not win. Chad Daybell will not get out of jail ever. He will get another death sentence or he will get life in prison. Lori Daybell will never get out of prison. She's right where she needs to be. So we don't need to worry about what's happening to them. But we do need to think about the legacy of JJ, Kylie, Charles, and Tammy. Okay, that's and I just wanted to say that for a moment because they are the important ones. Now, there's so many. Let me show you something here. Hang on a minute. We're going to look at a little video. Well, I think I should pull it up from YouTube because I don't want to get this third-party bullshit. I don't know why they're so. You just can't show some videos on YouTube because they consider it third party. So let me see if I can find Reagan announces her pregnancy. Let me see if I can pull that up. Hang on a second. Let's see. It is Reagan Hancock. I need to put her last name in there if I want to pull this up. I want to. I just want to. Let me see if we can find it. I don't know if they put it. If there's anybody who has shown that video on YouTube, I would hope that they would because that's a very important part of the life of Reagan Hancock. Hang on a minute, guys. I don't think it's on here. Oh, wait a minute. I don't think it's on here, which sucks because I really wanted to show that, but I don't want to get a third party strike. So we will just have to look at this in a different way. Okay. Hold on. Look at all of these. There's so many to choose from. Pregnancy announcement, Dictator Parker case. Oh, wait a minute. No, that's not the right one. Okay. Okay, hang on just a second, guys. All right. Well, but also I do want to talk about this for a second. Hang on a second here. Now, hold this. Now, this is going to be the Texarkana Police Department, and I had not seen this until recently. And I thought to myself, well, I do want to show this. I do want to talk about this, and then we'll move on. So hang on, let me share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, now this is going to be to KTAL News. Let me give them credit where credit is due for fair use. Oh, I need to read my fair use. KTAL News. Hang on. All right, put that right there. Now let's go ahead and get our fair use statement. I forgot to read it. I don't know why I forgot that, but I sure did. I guess because I just wanted to get in here and talk about this. Hang on. Hang on a second. We'll get that going right now. I'll go ahead and read our fair use statement, and then we're going to go ahead and look at this for a second and talk about this for just a moment. All right. This live stream may contain copyrighted materials, including news clips, photographs, court footage, and audio recordings, documents, and other media that have not been specifically authorized by the copyright owner. This material is used for purposes of criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research and public discussion. The use of such material is believed to constitute a fair use of any copyrighted material as provided for Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act of 1976. All rights remain with their prospective owners. The views and opinions expressed during this broadcast are those of the host and guest and are presented for informational and educational purposes. This channel does not claim ownership of the third-party content used for commentary and analysis. No copyright infringement is intended. There's our fair use. Okay. So now I'm going to play this, and we're going to listen to this for just a little bit. And then we're going to go on to the actual appeal that she made. She did make an appeal, and proudly I can say they refused to hear her case. Thank you. Her case does not need to be heard. She does not deserve an appeal. Here we
go. All right. I was in the office, and Chief Deputy McCarver come in the office and asked if we was available to assist New Boston. They advised us New Boston just had a homicide. And I told him yes, and at the time it was me and one Arkansas crime scene guy that was working that day. So we started heading to Boston, and once I got to New Boston, got out to find out what was going on, and they told me it was a female that apparently they thought had been beaten to death. So as I'm there, they told me that she was pregnant. And I thought, okay, so she's pregnant. And then next question was, well, how's the baby? Is the baby going to be able to be delivered or what? And they went in there and they come back and said, well, the baby's gone. And so my remark was, the baby is gone as in deceased or is gone as in gone? And they said, no, the baby is gone. The baby is missing. And as soon as they told me that, I mean, your mind starts running. We got to contact hospitals. We got to get officers. It sounds horrible, but we got to get officers starting to look at dumpsters near around and things like that. And you start playing 1,000 scenarios through your head. And I did my initial walkthrough and see what I saw. And at that point, I knew I was going to need help. So I called my partner, Spencer.
I can't imagine these police officers and what they live with daily, because they have seen so many things, but this particular scene sticks in their mind, and it will stick in their mind forever, because you're talking about the most innocence of innocence, and that is a baby that wasn't even ready to be born yet, that was taken horrifically from a deranged, sick woman who should have been arrested a long time ago. I mean, you're talking about financial fraud. Every husband she's another Letitia Souch. Every husband she had, she's claimed the pregnancy thing with. Every one of them. I mean, there's just so many things about her that have came out later that was not known before, that let you know just how much of a horrible person she was. And Wade Griffin, and he's another story in his own right. And Wade Griffin does need to be talked about, because there are things that he is not being honest about. He knew. He was told. He absolutely knew that she could not be pregnant. And nobody is pregnant 10 months. Let's get that straight, okay? Nobody is pregnant 10 months. Here we
go. He was off on some medical leave for his wife.
I don't know why.
And I told him what I had. And I said, you don't have to come out. I said, but we'll be here for a while. And so he come out to assist me. And then we called the other Arkansas crime scene person out too. So now we got 4 crime scenes. You got 2 Arkansas and 2 Texas. It was such a big scene. We called Arkansas for assistance, and they come helped us with it. New Boston talked to the chief. He said, once we seen this, we knew it was over our head. And he said, that's why your phone number's on our bulletin board. He said, that's why we called y'all, because we don't mind assisting other agencies, because we're the only dedicated crime scene unit in this area. So they called us, and we got there. And we started doing our initial walkthrough, and the first thing I noticed at the scene was a lot of bloody footprints, shoe impressions. And at that time, I told the responding officer, I want names, pictures, boot sizes of everybody that's been in the house, because I knew it may come down to shoe impression comparisons. At the time, we didn't know what we had. You're running scenarios through your head, and you're thinking, well, boyfriend done it, husband found out that she was pregnant by somebody else, he done it. You start running all kinds of scenarios. And I even told the guys whenever we had our meeting, I said, 3 things can happen. I said, either the husband's the suspect, or she has a boyfriend. I said, or just some random psycho come and done it. And unfortunately, it was the third choice out of that. And so we got there and took overall photographs at first. And then at the time I asked, do we have a search warrant to go into the house to do our thing? They said, no, we have consent. And I said, consent's not going to work in this situation, because to me, your number one suspects right now is the husband. Who gave you consent? Well, the husband did. Well, that's not going to work. And so,
okay, so you have to have a search warrant. You can't just have a verbal consent to go in, especially in this type of a crime scene. And it's sad that the first person they look at is the husband or the boyfriend and things like this. This man is innocent. He was at work. His life it's forever changed, forever. Okay, here we go.
Then we had to stop and wait for the search warrants. And that's whenever I called Spencer and said, look, it takes a couple hours to get a search warrant and things like that. And so I called Spencer and he come up and helped me.
Hang on, let me fix my earbuds.
And just going in, the shoe impressions, I got to looking at shoe impressions, and we determined there were two different style of shoe impressions. Okay, we had those two, and as we were starting to do our thing, then word come out that a state trooper had stopped a woman in DeKalb and had delivered a baby and was going to Idabel. Well, we're thinking she's in DeKalb. Why wasn't she going to St. Michael's? Why wasn't she going to Mount Pleasant? Why?
The reason why is because those hospitals knew that there was no way she could have a baby. She had been in those hospitals. They knew her medical history. So she goes out of state to try to hide this, thinking that she's going to be able to get away with this, which I don't understand that at all. I mean, everybody knows that there should be something in your bloodstream that says, oh, yes, she was recently pregnant. I don't understand. If she did all the studying to know how to take this baby out of the womb, how come she didn't know all of that too? Something is so disconnected with Taylor Parker, period. There's some huge disconnect with this person. Here, we'll keep listening.
Idabel. And it was a dispatcher that actually turned the detectives onto, say, hey, just a little while ago, a trooper said a woman delivered a baby on the side of the road. But they started checking into that, come to find out it was Parker that had the baby and was heading to Oklahoma. And the reason she was heading to Oklahoma is because she's already burned bridges in St. Michael's and Mount Pleasant. She couldn't use either one of the hospitals because she's had a hysterectomy or a partial hysterectomy, and she couldn't have any children. Mm-hmm. And so once we found out it was an abduction of the child, then you kind of start honing in on, okay, now what do we look for? Is this an abduction of somebody that come in the house and took? You kind of start changing your mind and your theories a little bit about what's going on.
Plus, the husband was pretty much alibied out. He'd been at work the whole entire time during the homicide, so we knew he was out. Like we were saying, as soon as he called me and told me of the case, I did the same thing. We go through the scenarios. And I had already had the same three scenarios. The whole entire time I'm driving to Boston, I'm thinking, how many deputies and troopers can I pull to go start searching every roadway, dumpster in the area to try to find the child? Because typically it's either one of two things. Either they take the baby to take for themselves or they're taking it to dispose of the baby.
Homer absolutely did the correct thing. He absolutely I'm glad he filed a wrongful death suit against her and Mr. Griffin, because I'm telling you, Griffin knew she was not pregnant. I don't understand why he did not do something about. See, when you know somebody is lying about something like that, you got to stop them, because when you know somebody is mentally ill, you know the extremes they will go to try to prove you wrong. They knew she was a dangerous person. That so many times we learn that these people are dangerous people and other people knew it and they did nothing to stop it. And that is what is sad, because nobody pays attention to what these monsters can do, what they're capable of. Then they do it, and that's when people start talking about it. Here we go.
So we were going through that scenario, and like you said, I was actually medical leave with my wife, and she actually gave me a very mean look for actually agreeing to go to the case. But I knew the complexity of the case was going to be, it needed to be done.
So when we
Amen.
got search warrants and everything, and we get inside the residence. You kind of just sit back and you kind of just you look. You let the scene talk to you. And it kind of sounds corny, but it's blood tells you a lot of things. Okay, and so you sit back and you look, and we're looking at blood. There's blood everywhere. There was a bloody jar in the kitchen. There was a bloody jar full of sand in the living room. There was.
What do you mean a bloody jar? There was so much blood that blood was overflowing into a jar,
It was mason jars.
Okay.
And it was actually from their wedding. You know how you pour the sand into the mason jars for weddings?
Okay.
One of them was
that's a cute idea.
And the other one had the sand in it. I believe the one in it was about 4 pounds, I think is what we.
I'd have to look at it again.
I can't
4
recall.
or 5 pounds worth of sand.
It was a
heavy weight.
And when I say blood was on it, I'm talking blood transfer from like a hand onto it.
Okay, got you.
And
Can you
looking
imagine?
at her,
Okay.
and spatter and things like that. And looking at the blood on that, then it was like, well, she was beaten with one of these jars. We once we started looking at the body, she had an indentation on her head that we knew come from a jar, probably come from a jar with sand in it because it's a heavier object. And when we first started looking, we had blood everywhere. So our first initial thought was this woman fought for her life. She fought this suspect, this person to come in. She fought. That was our first hypothesis. But once we started the investigation.
Let me tell you a little something about this right here. So a glass jar with 4 pounds of sand can, with hundreds to over thousands in PSI, depending on how fast it's moving at the time of the impact. So, you're going to use, I can tell you what the formula is for that. It is F equals M plus V over T, okay? So the impact speed is 14 feet per second. Stop time is 2 ms. Well, anyway, so it's about 300 to 500 pounds of force. So every time she struck her in the head, it was 300 to 500 pounds of force that she's hitting this woman with this glass jar full of sand. Think about that for a moment.
And started looking at things, and once Taylor Park was arrested, she had no injuries on her. So that indicates to us her fingernails are broken, the victim's fingernails are broken, and things like that. She was covering up. She was ambushed. She was hit. She's covering up the whole time, and she's being beaten with something. She's been beaten in the back of the head. She was fingers were broke. She's got bruising on her arms, but she is just taking a beating, and she's covering up. Well, we got blood in the kitchen, and we got blood in the living room, and we got blood at the front door. And
So this is happening everywhere in the house. She's running away while
she's trying to escape the assault, and
she got assaulted right at the door at the kitchen, in the garage door. Yeah. Whenever she was assaulted, I believe she was hit in the back of the head with an object, either a hammer or a crowbar, and it.
These details, trigger warning, these details are horrific. These details are not something that was actually told. I mean, we don't have footage of the courtroom because it was not videoed. I wish we did have it, but we don't have it. So we can only go by what the probable cause statement says, what the police officers are telling us happened there, and then what we can read in the appeal, which we're going to go back. And that appeal is 72 pages long. I did not have time to read the whole thing the other day, but we're going to revisit the appeal and look at the whole 72 pages after we listen to these officers detail what's the real facts here in this case.
It takes more than one hit to start blood spatter. The first hit lacerates the skin. So whenever she was hit, she starts bleeding, and we had blood on a refrigerator that was blood spatter from hair. You could tell it was from hair. Where she went down, she got up, she tried to run out the front door, was attacked at the front door, brought back in the living room, and then she was brutally attacked there. Up against the wall, we had the blood spatter on the wall. You could pretty much, with the blood, look at everywhere she had been. And I'll never forget, we're sitting there, we're looking at it, and we weren't saying a word to each other. We're just looking because we're just trying to soak everything in because there's so much. And I looked at my partner and I said, she was alive when that baby was taken.
Okay.
And he says, I think you're right.
Now, that is a huge trigger warning right there, because what he's about to tell us is exactly what I was talking about a while ago. And found that there's a broken fingernail found in the materials of the placenta because she is holding on for dear life. She knows what's happening to her. And I'm going to tell you something. That, in my mind, makes me want to cry. It is hard.
And the reason we come to that conclusion was because of the blood and the absence of blood. We could tell by the blood spatter and the blood stains where she was at when the baby was fully removed. She was on her back when we got there. And we knew she had been moved because of the blood. So one of our first questions is, who moved the body? Well, nobody knew who moved the body because it was such a traumatic thing. Nobody could remember. So we played video back, and it was the EMT, the paramedic that come in. He pulled her over to check for the baby, and you can see him. He looks and he stands up, and you can see the look on his face, and he looks back down, and that's when he sets back up and he goes, that baby's gone. So she was on her back, but she died on her stomach, and the blood told us that. So that was an indication to us that she was still alive, because you're not going to get a baby out of somebody with them laying on their stomach, So once that baby was pulled from her, which she fought for, as she was walking off, you could tell she was trying to go after her and then died on the floor.
And that's what, when I mentioned that this case had a profound impact on us. We're both parents. We could just imagine the terror she went through knowing she's dying and this person is taking her child. I couldn't imagine that. I mean, that everyone in our unit were parents. So that's what bugged us the most. And that what left a psychological impact on us was that knowing that fact and knowing that she's alive during this.
The horror that she was going through during that whole altercation. So go ahead.
And we were plenty of murders where they fought for the life.
I mean, I understand the profound impact that he's talking about. And actually, it should have a profound impact on every one of us that are parents. Because the horror, the pain, the agony, she knows she's losing her life. She's watching this bitch run off with her child. Even Taylor herself says, and I put the baby on her chest to give her a kiss and tell her mama goodbye. What kind of a monstrous animal are we talking about? Is this the devil incarnate here? Taylor Parker, you, myself, my dear, need to be going to the death chamber pretty damn fast. But we'll talk about that in a minute.
Or stuff like that. And they went through terror as well. But like I said, a new parent losing their child this way and not knowing what's going to happen to that child is unfathomable for us.
And she put up an effort. And the reason we know that she had struggled and tug of war with a baby is one of her broken fingernails. She had like press-on nails, and we found 3 at the house, and we were missing one. Well, that fingernail was found in the uterus of the child whenever they recovered the uterus. So she was pulling hard enough for her to lose a nail. So now we know we've got somebody in there, and we know from experience what we have got to do. We got to determine how many suspects. How many? Was it one person? Was it 2 people? Was it 3 people that come in here and done that? Well, looking at the scene, it was obvious to us with the blood and the things at the scene that it was just a single person. It was a single person that committed this crime. And the reason we can confidently say that is because at the scene, we had 2 different types of shoe impressions. Okay. So you're going to assume one is suspects, one is victims. Well, as we start doing these shoe impressions with this, I say shoe impressions, they're blood impressions of shoe prints, walking in blood, and they're transferring that blood all over the floor. Sure. And we only had 2 different types of shoes. Well, we found out that Taylor Parker, when she was arrested, was wearing a pair of Crocs. Those Crocs were shown to the victim's mother. The victim said, "Those are my daughter's Crocs." She said, "I bought those Crocs for her."
Now, think about what he's saying right there. The bitch then put on the victim's Crocs, walked out of that house with the victim's Crocs on and her baby, the victim's baby, in her arm, and put the umbilical cord and placenta into her own clothing, etc., to make it look like she just had the baby and that the umbilical cord was still attached. That is how demented this person is. Let's keep going.
Those are her. Those were there at the house. So during all this altercation, Taylor Parker's wearing a pair of shoes, or sandals is what she was wearing because of the shoe impression. She was wearing sandals, and then after she got the baby and all that, and she left, she cleaned up, and she took the victim's shoes to put them on to leave. Mm-hmm. So the shoe prints that belonged to the victim was actually Taylor Parker walking around the house after she was deceased, walking through blood and cleaning up and things like that. We knew one was a Croc. The other one we didn't know, and we searched and searched and searched for the type of pattern that it was. And we knew it was a sandal. The reason we knew it was a sandal was because we have her on video at an Easy Mart right before the murders, and she was wearing a white pair of sandals. So we're focused on sandals, and we searched for days and days and days.
And when he means search, we're actually going to shoe stores all around town, actually taking sandals, looking at the bottom of it, and having a photo of the shoe impression going, no, that's not a match.
Going on the internet, looking at images on the internet. Does this pattern type match up? So that pattern got instilled in my brain. And so I was in Fort Smith visiting my grandbabies, and I was walking through the house, and I looked down, and there was a sandal. My daughter's sandals were sitting over by the couch. And so I looked at them, I thought, So I went over and I picked it up. And as soon as I picked it up, I said, that's the design. And I went in there, I said, "Where did you get these sandals?" She goes, "They're just sandals from Walmart." And so when I got back, I took pictures of it, and I told them, I said, "This is the brand of shoe." So we went to Walmart, and the year before is when they stopped that pattern on those sandals. So they were older sandals, and the new ones didn't have that.
Right.
So what we did is I got online on eBay and found a pair of sandals that looked just like the ones that was in our blood shoe print. So once I bought those off of eBay, and when I got them.
That is dedication. That is dedication right there, to actually spend his own money, go buy the shoes off of eBay to match it to the pattern that was found in the home that she was wearing the shoes in the film, in the videos, the CCTV footage that they have of her to prove she was there. I love it. I love it. Great cop right here.
We brought them to work. We called Life Share.
Out here.
The
blood bank.
Yeah, the blood bank here in Texarkana. And we kind of told them, hey, well, we went by there. We didn't call them. We went by there and said, hey, look, do y'all have any old expired blood or anything like that? Because this is the reason. And we told them about the case, which they already knew about it. And we told them we're trying to replicate the shoe impression. And they said, we'll get in touch with you. So out of Shreveport, they called us from Shreveport. They said, we heard y'all needed some blood. And we told them that we will help you 100%. We've got some old blood. She goes, it's tested blood. It's just expired. We can't give it to nobody. So they send us a couple of pints of blood. And so we go into our lab and we start trying to replicate the shoe impressions. We went to Lowe's. We bought the same type of tile that was in the floor at Lowe's and took it into our lab and set it down. We had our female partner from Arkansas side slip the sandals on, step in the blood, and walk, and we could replicate those type of shoe patterns that was in that. So, and those type of sandals they sell in white. Mm-hmm. So we finally got that down. So now we know it was a Croc in this sandal here.
That is dedication. That is extreme dedication to get to the truth and have no errors. My God, they are good. They are good. I like them. Love them. Here we go.
And if you look at the blood, we could tell that some of it she had been walking around carrying something bloody, a towel, the baby or whatever, because he had blood drops on top of that. We'll be able to show you some of that where it hit and to indicate that, yeah, she was walking around in these shoes carrying something that was bloody.
And I think in Taylor Parker's mind, she thought the assault would be like on TV. I hit her in the head once, she'll go down unconscious. I can do what I need to do and be done and out of here. She didn't realize it takes a lot more than that to knock somebody out effectively. And like he said, we originally thought it was a knockdown, drag out fight. Then come to find out it wasn't. There's still a lot of things that we never recovered. We never recovered Taylor's actual shoes.
We never recovered
the hammer or whatever.
Or crowbar, whatever
she used to beat on her. We never recovered that.
Cell phones. Never found the cell phones. Never found the victim's cell phone. Never found
Taylor's.
They had some of Taylor's, but not one. Hers they didn't find. She had several different cell phones because she would.
Isn't that typical of these criminals? They have multiple phones. They're calling and talking to different people on different phones. Trying to hide this, that, or the other from the other people. It's so typical. Right there, she is. She's not. There's not one thing different about this piece of shit criminal than any other one of these murders that we have watched before.
She would text herself being somebody else, and that's what's amazing. And we brought up the husband earlier because that's going to be one of your first primary suspects. And one of the things that we had to battle in court is people couldn't believe that the husband didn't know about it. And
Taylor's husband?
Taylor's husband, okay, yeah. That Taylor's the suspect's husband couldn't have known about it. He said, well, they would have had to know that she was pregnant. Well, people don't understand. She bought a prosthetic belly. She had a prosthetic belly. She had bought sonograms. She had bought all this stuff. And you can go online, fakeapregnancy.com, and you can buy everything you need to make somebody think that you're pregnant.
Ooh. I really wish you wouldn't have put that out because that can give other people ideas. If you can go to fakeapregnancy.com and get all of this information and pull off the same scheme. That's dangerous. It's dangerous to know that information. Boy.
And this guy thought she was pregnant. And she was texting herself because they have a hog farm and they sell hogs. She told her husband, look, I'm going to Idabel because they're going to do a C-section, take this baby. He said, well, I'm going with you. She said, well, you can't. He says, well, why not? She said, remember, we've got to sell these hogs to this guy that was, 3 hours away? Something like that. 3 hours away, you got to go sell these hogs. And he said, well, I'll go sell the hogs, then I'll come to the hospital. She said, perfect. I think in her mind, two things going to happen. She either had the baby or she lost the baby. So the husband gets to the farm and drives up and tells the farmer guy, hey, man, here. He goes, why are you here? He said, well, I brought these hogs that you've been wanting. He says, I'm not buying any hogs. I don't want any hogs. And come to find out, she had been texting herself back and forth, showing him this hog sale, but she's the one doing all of it to get him 3 hours away so she could go try to have this.
But you know what, though? Think about this. If you're pregnant and you're not letting somebody go to the hospital, that is a huge red flag. He should have known right then something is very, very wrong because there's no problem letting somebody know I can't deliver hogs today. My wife is going to be induced to labor or they're going to do a C-section. My wife, I'm having a baby. The people buying the hogs would have been like, okay, sure, no problem. See, Wade Griffin, you're not that dumb. Come on. No, I don't believe that he did not suspect or know something was very wrong. I believe he knew something was very wrong before this.
This baby. It was all planned out.
Not to mention, she befriended other pregnant women that were all similar in due dates. So she had backup plans that if she couldn't get to this one, she'd get to the others. And unfortunately, it's just Reagan that was found.
Yeah.
And became the victim of it.
And it's just, the impact that it has had on us, like we say, it's something that'll never be forgotten. And I made the statement standing right there in the living room. I told him, I said, I'm through saying I've seen it all. Because every time I say I see it all, something worse happens. I said, so I've taken that out of my vocabulary. I no longer use that.
Because fetal abduction murders are so rare.
Yes, they are.
I actually looked it up, and I think there's only 2 reported cases in the year 2020, one in Brazil and one in New Boston, Texas. That's how rare these kind of cases are. So like he said, we try not to jinx ourselves, and we have seen quite a bit, some really messed up cases, different types of scenarios. And now we can actually say we actually investigated one of those. And like you said, I really don't want to work another one like it ever again. It's one and done. But
the brutality that was done, I mean, she was beaten with objects. She was beaten with a 4-pound mason jar full of sand, and she was sliced. She was cut. Matter of fact, the scalpel type knife, at one time, a blade broken in the victim's neck. It was still in there.
yeah.
She was cut literally from, and I testified in court on this. I showed a photograph of a cut from back behind the ear that come all the way to right about here. And one of the things I pointed out in court is I believe that was one of the last ones of making sure that she is deceased. I believe she was on her stomach. I believe she walked up to her, raised her head, started here, and cut, because all this big cut was what we call a post-mortem incised wound.
Oh.
There was no blood in that wound. I had the incised wound up here.
You gotta think to yourself, what was the point of that? After all you had done to this woman, what was the point of that? Just heinous, cruel. Damn. I mean, oh boy, here we go. It's hard to even come up with a word to talk about when you talk about just how nasty and horrible Taylor Parker is. I think she's one of the worst I've seen. I think she's right up there. I mean, I first said Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her were the same, but no, I believe Taylor Parker is worse than Gypsy Rose Blanchard ever was. Here we go.
Where she was cut in the face. I could show the court what the blood looks like in the skin and on the fatty tissue. Here, I can show them how clean it was. And when it's clean like that, it's post-mortem because there's no longer any blood. And then she was cut from one hip to the other. She did not really, the baby and the uterus and all that was pretty well intact.
Yeah, the baby was not injured.
Okay.
The baby died pretty much because of
the sudden removement of the
traumatic extraction is the term the medical examiner used. It's mainly the mom was bleeding out so massively at that point that you're also denying that baby that blood flow. So it just wasn't going to survive outside after that much trauma too. And I've heard people try to dog on the state trooper that pulled her over, saying, "Oh, he should have known that wasn't her baby." So speaking from experience.
Oh, no. Actually, no, that's not even fair. That's not even fair. You cannot blame the state trooper that pulled her over. He had no idea who she was or who the baby was. He saw an umbilical cord going from that baby down her pants. Now I want y'all to think about this. Think about this. Who in their right mind just had a baby at home or in a car or whatever, and they have their pants on still? No, that's a huge red flag right there. Something, but no, you cannot blame the trooper, period.
As an officer, if I pull over a woman and she's had a baby in her arms and she says she delivered on the side of the road, I'm not going to doubt it at first. And she went through some extremes to actually try to make it look like she gave birth. And it wasn't until she got to the hospital and the doctors actually confirmed, said, "Nope, you never gave birth." And she, even to that time, she is still lying to Oklahoma police saying, "No, it's my baby. I gave birth to it." Even after the doctor told her, "No, it's not medically possible," until she finally started giving up a little bit here and there.
And when the trooper pulled her over, she actually had the umbilical cord stuffed down
in her pants.
Yes. So like, the trooper had no, you walk up, she's holding the baby. Okay, so what are you going to do? You're going to get an ambulance. That's all you can do. You can't do anything else. But luckily, I think he was going to pull her over because she was speeding. And then she called 911 asking for help. I just had a baby on the side of the road. And that's why it was like back to back. She knew that, hey, I'm fixing to get stopped. And she's just another part of the plan.
She planned out quite a bit. I don't think she is as smart as a lot of people think on certain aspects of it, but she did point out a lot of good detail. How she kept her lies straight is unbelievable to me. And she,
that's what a good sociopath does. They keep their lies straight. They know who they told what, and they're able to manage it for a long time. And they mimic the other people. They're very, very smart individuals. Too bad that they are sociopaths. If they use their intelligence to do something great, yeah, imagine what they could do. Here we go.
she's even fooled other officers before.
Oh yeah, she's fooled a lot of people. Yeah. But one person she didn't fool was Kelly Crisp, our prosecutor. She did an excellent job, and I don't know if we would have gotten the death penalty if she was not the prosecutor. The way she prosecuted that case, the amount of time and effort she put into that, she knew that this woman could not ever see the light of day again because she would do something like this again. There's no doubt in my mind that she would do something like this again because she was just so manipulative and things like that. It was just it was an amazing job on their part too to get the conviction that we were hoping for.
And Taylor also messed it up with, she had other inmates write letters of confession to being there during the crime, and what she inadvertently did was she was actually,
you know what? There's another case that we've talked about before where they had inmates writing letters to try for them to take the blame of what happened so that this person looked like they were innocent, right? We've had that before. This was just last month we talked about a case like that. Here we go. We're going to talk about Kelly Crisp in just a moment. Hang on.
putting truth in there.
And some truth in it.
But she was also deflecting it as she claimed, who was it, Kodiak?
Some
gang member named Kodiak actually did the murders. And she was just there. Well, there's one part in her letter she wrote that at some point Kodiak heard something at the front door of the house. So he looked out a window to see if somebody's outside. The problem with that is we could prove that actually happened. There was actually a bloody partial handprint right by a window by the front door. So inadvertently, she's saying someone else did it, but it's really her doing it. She's deflecting it. Mm-hmm. And that's how we were able to explain, well, that bloody handprint was Taylor. She's peeking out the window because she's hearing some ruckus outside and she's thinking, oh crap, they're after me now. Mm-hmm. And she did it on quite a few different revisions of her story.
Yeah, she gave 3 or 4
She'd give a little bit of fact here and there that we could prove through the crime scene evidence that she didn't realize we'd catch her on it.
You speak of the time that the prosecutor put in. What about the time you guys put in? How long were you at that scene initially? How many days did you go back to that scene? Kind of encapsulate all of that.
There was 4 of us working it. So you got 4 individuals working one scene. We were there for 13 hours.
Something like that.
13 or 14 hours working that scene. We left there 10 or 11 o'clock.
But see, it's not only working the scene, it's all the things they did after the scene to put it all together, to find the shoes, to do the blood, to make sure that all the information they had, all the evidence they had could be used. Now let's talk about Kelly Crisp for a moment. She's a wonderful, wonderful attorney. Kelly Crisp is the first district attorney at Bowie County, Texas, and the lead prosecutor who tried Taylor Parker's capital murder case. She was widely regarded as one of the most experienced felony prosecutors in the county with a career built on a violent crime litigation. So she has taken more than 135 jury trials to verdict, mostly involving capital murders, aggravated sexual assaults, child sexual assaults, organized criminal activity, and human trafficking. She's known for hands-on investigation involvement. Crisp is known for going to the crime scenes, attending the investigating briefings, working directly with the officers, staying overnight at police departments during major investigations. She's there. She spends her time. She makes sure she has every I dotted and every T crossed. So she was the lead prosecutor in the Taylor Parker case. She has been recognized for exemplary work through the Texas Department of Public Safety, honored her team for their work on the Parker investigation and the prosecution. Her public statements after the appeal, she says, because we're going to talk about the appeal next, that the criminal appeals upheld Parker's death sentence in 2025, and Chris says, the decision confirmed the jury's verdict was just and right. The court correctly found that baby Braxton Sage was alive after her extraction, making her an individual under Texas kidnapping law. The case brought horror and sadness to everyone involved. So her reputation in the community, and we're talking about Kelly Crisp here, she's publicly endorsed by the Texarkana Police Officers Association, Texarkana Municipal Police Association, and Nash Police Department. So they trust her. They know she does a thorough preparation. She has clear communication, and she gets involved. She's not like some of these others who just wait for everybody to bring her the evidence and then just prepares like that. She puts herself out there. This is the kind of prosecutor you want to be a DA right here. All right. In fact, I wonder if she's going to run for district attorney instead of just an assistant. She should be a DA right there. So that is all about Kelly Crisp. Let's keep going.
O'clock that night. Of course, had to be back at work at 8 o'clock in the morning. And it dominated all of her time, not including the time that I put in off duty looking for shoes and, just trying to piece things together.
Yeah.
I couldn't begin to tell you how many man hours it took.
Hours in the lab combing through every piece of evidence, because people don't realize it's the evidence we collect that scene. We have to photograph again. We have to document it. We have to go through it with a fine-tooth comb a lot. And
categorize everything. We have to go to Swift's in Dallas, get everything that was removed from the bodies there. Any kind of evidence that we turn into a lab, we've got to take it to Garland, Texas, to the state crime lab. I did a trip with the prosecutors to the medical examiner's office so we could specifically talk to the medical examiners and the assistants that actually worked that case. That is the time I found out that she was hit in the back of the head with a hammer or a crowbar, because that information was relayed to us. And with that information, then you can start tying up some loose ends, thinking, okay, this is why this is here. This makes sense, and things like that.
Because we're kind of behind the curve when we're assisting in their agency. Sometimes we don't get all the information passed back to us. And because it was not just New Boston Police working it, Texas Rangers were involved. So there's a couple of times that information didn't get fully informed back to us until getting closer to the trial time. That's when we started getting more info.
More information.
Okay, this now fits what we're seeing. If we would have known that earlier, we would have figured it out.
How many pieces of evidence are we talking that you guys processed?
I should have brought that.
I got the file.
You got copies?
If you know offhand, I mean, we're talking hundreds, we're talking thousands.
No, we're talking.
Under 100.
Okay.
Yeah, it was under 100.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because processed everything
areas.
for fingerprints. We had a bloody partial print on the wall.
Okay.
Cut the wall out to see, but we couldn't never identify that print of. Matching it up to either Taylor or anybody else. We couldn't identify it at all.
Were Taylor's fingerprints found at the scene?
No.
They were not. Okay.
The problem
me see if this fixes it. Unbelievable. I don't know what's wrong. Okay, let me see if this works. Let me see if this will work. Okay, hang on. Let me see if this is going to work now. Let me see if it's working. Hang on a minute. Testing, test. I guess you can hear it. All right, I think I might have fixed it. I'm not sure. Let me see if it's going to work this way. For some reason, my microphone just dropped. I have to go off of the other. Let me see if it'll work now. Testing. Let me see if I can hear anything. Hang on a second. I don't know if I can hear anything from here. Nope, it's not working. Oh my God, I don't understand what to do about this. What the hell is wrong with this piece of shit? Okay, here we go. Disconnect this, I guess. Why can't it? I don't know what to do about the sound over here. Okay, well, let's see if we can fix it over here. Speakers, volume mixer. I don't know. Sound output. Let's see. Okay, I don't have any sound. Sorry, I have no sound. Fuck. Oh. What's wrong with this piece of garbage? I don't understand. What is wrong with this fucker? Oops, I said a bad word. Put this back on and see if it'll connect. Here we go. Let's see if it's going to connect. Why can't it connect? I don't understand. No, I don't want to. No, no, no. Schedule restart later. Okay. Now maybe it'll fix it. Oh my God, what the hell is wrong with this? There's no sound anywhere. I don't get it. What the? Oh why can't you connect? I don't understand. I don't understand. If I drop my Bluetooth, I'm gonna. Maybe not. Oh my God, what the hell? Here. Okay, there we go. All right. All right, now I think we're back on track. I think we're okay now. There you go. Let me make sure you can hear, and we'll just keep going.
A lot of people don't understand about fingerprints is they think just because you simply touch something, your fingerprint's going to be up there and you can identify it.
Right.
That's not true. There's a lot of times that your fingerprints will go through motion, which will cause a smearing action,
Sure.
Especially bloody fingerprints are smearing everywhere. Then you get the phenomenon of overlays where you have a fingerprint over another fingerprint over another fingerprint. And it's possible to try to find them identifiable, but it's very, very difficult. And we try that all techniques. We use chemicals on the blood stains.
You know, I don't know what I'm going to do about this, but I am sick of dealing with this. I don't understand why all of a sudden it drops the sound. It makes no sense at all. It's like you cannot have a reliable stream. I don't know if it's StreamYard. I don't know if it's the laptop. I don't know what it is. But you know what? I'm real tired of dealing with it. I think I'm going to buy a desktop and quit trying to mess with this damn laptop. Sorry about that, guys. If you were out there, come back. If you're in the bushes, come back. I just had a sound issue. So sorry. I'm tired of it running my damn live streams. Here we go.
Try to enhance them. Just couldn't ever get a good identifiable fingerprint to match to anyone. Even the victim, Reagan's fingerprints, we really didn't find in the house.
In her own house.
Yeah.
And we probably did more experimental things on this case, like with the shoe impressions and the blood and fingerprinting things differently on this case than we have others because of the uniqueness of it and just trying to get as much evidence as you can to prove. But like I said, we didn't even get the victim's fingerprints from the house, no foreign DNA or anything. So that was kind of gets a little disheartening, but everything else.
Because if I remember correctly, Taylor's DNA wasn't even found.
No, we didn't. Wasn't even found. No, so she was definitely ready. She probably had gloves on.
Gloves on, hair tied back, all of it.
Long sleeves where she got scratched or something.
Sure, yeah.
We did find hair in the victim's right hand.
Okay.
And then we thought, good, she pulled, because we thought she was fighting for her life.
Yes.
Thought she done pulled some of the suspect's hair. Come to find out, it was her own hair because she's covering up and she's been beaten and she's just pulling her own hair out.
Oh, and we forgot to mention the 3-year-old was home at
the 3-year-old was at the house when all this occurred. And there was a diaper right there in the middle blood, like she had changed the child.
I don't think that ever actually truly happened.
I don't think it happened. Yeah, I don't think that happened. She may have got the diaper for the little one at first, because once she got the baby out, she placed the baby on the couch, and you could tell that by the fluids that was on the couch. But the baby, the 3-year-old, she had sent her back to her. But she already seen what was going on. We had an incident that one of our old partners showed up next day or whatever.
Oh yeah.
She was one of our crime scene partners at one time. She was working for a different agency at the time, and she had brought a dog. They had bought a dog from her, and she heard this happen, and the husband called her and said, "Look, I can't take this dog because of this incident." So she come over to get the dog, and she told us, the 3-year-old asked her, "Do you know my mama?" And she says, "Yeah, I sure do." She said, "Are you not going to hurt her like the other woman did you?"
Can you imagine that? That is so horrible to hear, that that little girl knew that that was happening, that her mother was being hurt. And now this little girl lives with that fear that every woman that shows up is going to hurt a mother. Is going to hurt the mother. Is going to hurt the mother. That's so sad. These are things I did not know about until we started listening to this here. I heard a little bit about it on a different channel. I thought, my God, I got to play this. There's so much information from this right here that we did not know. All right, let's keep going.
She's seen, of course she had to reassure her that no, she wasn't, so the child was in there, and that's that's another thing that kind of sticks with you, the trauma that occurred to that child, and the family itself. I mean, it's just unfathomable. It's unbelievable that somebody would do something like this.
Because Reagan's mom found her, so she had to see that, and then her stepdad. I think the stepdad was there.
There's one when he got the child out of the house. Yeah. So I mean, it's tragic. It's horrific. It'll never leave my mind. As long as I have a sound mind in this business, I may not have a sound mind for long, but it's you don't wish it on anybody, and being the crime scene guys, that's the way we look at everything in life. We see these incidences with mass shootings and all that, and the first thing we think about is those crime scene guys. Man, that would be, if we had something like that happen, how would we work it? How would we do this? And in law enforcement, we're always learning. Unfortunately, we're in the business of reacting. So if something bad happens, like the Columbine shooting, those police officers got all kinds of scorn and in trouble by their actions. But at the time in law enforcement, they did exactly how they were trained. You set up perimeters, you wait for your big boys, your SWAT team to get there, things like that. After that incident, now you start looking at things differently. Now we know, okay, you can't set up a perimeter. If there is a shooter in a target-rich environment, you go straight on. And you put yourself between that shooter and the targets, because then there's fixing to be a fight. And I promise you, I'm better trained than you are, and I'm fixing to win that fight. Mm-hmm. So now everything changes. So whenever we see incidents happen throughout the United States or overseas or whatever, we look at crime scenes. We get a lot of crime scene information, and we start thinking, okay, if this happens here, this is how we need to handle this. So things are always.
You know what though? The thing is these police officers never expect to walk into what they walked into that day. Nobody expects to see a crime scene like that, because the thought of somebody cutting a child out of another person's stomach at home is so unfathomable. And like you said, it's hardly ever happens. There's not many cases of this. We talked about that the other day, about how many times that we have seen a case similar to this. So we'll let him keep talking.
Changing, especially in crime scene. Technology is changing every day. And so we kind of got to try to stay up with the technology and events to try to continue to learn.
I'm going to start with you, Spencer, with this, but the questions for both of you would answer individually on it. Does this case haunt you? Does this case pop into your thought process How often do you think about the events of this case? Is it something that, you'll be getting coffee somewhere and all of a sudden it just pops in your brain?
I think at this point in my career, they don't really pop as much in my head, especially since this case has been done for 3 years now. We've had other cases that fill the void in that time frame. Now, there are times that I might sit there and think about when I had my daughter, and I might think of just having a glimpse of a thought of the terror she went through. Also, a local Christmas parade of lights venue here in town, or actually out in New Boston, took my family out there one day. We're driving through, and they started having signs of in memory of Michael Page, a fellow deputy that was killed in line of duty. Okay, that's cool. And then I see a sign saying in memory of Reagan Hancock and Braxton Hancock. I'm like, my wife was like, well, who's that? I said, that's the New Boston murder victims. And that just, as soon as you hear the names, it floats back to you. And then sometimes we'll have people just randomly ask, well, you are a crime scene. Did y'all do that New Boston one? Yeah. And as soon as you bring it to our mind, we start thinking about it.
Yeah.
And we use it also as a teaching material because we also train other agencies on crime scene. Mm-hmm. And because it's a unique case, we present it as, okay, here's what we got. Do y'all see anything wrong with it? Are y'all seeing what we're seeing? So these newer officers will understand the complexity and stuff like that.
Could you imagine if either one of these officers would have been a new officer coming upon that scene and not having the investigative tools, knowledge, and materials they needed to actually pull this crime scene together, get the evidence gathered, and take this monster to trial? It's knowing that they were ready, able, and had the experience needed help this case be a death penalty case to get this monster away from the rest of us. Here we go.
At this point, like me and Mark have discussed before, we're so far in our career that I guess we could say we're kind of damaged on the normal human seeing that would just have ungodly nightmares and terrors about it. We've seen stuff like this so much that it really doesn't bother me much anymore. I don't effectively lose sleep anymore over it. It still affects, it still hurts, but
it's hard.
It's to the point where we don't constantly harp on it or think about it. Now, our junior guy in the crime scene unit at that scene, you could tell it bothered him. He kept wanting to talk about the case. And we were constantly like, once we're done with it, let's move on. Let's focus on other ones because we don't want to keep dragging up these kind of cases.
Yeah. And for me, over the years, I've gotten really good at compartmentalizing things that happen. So I haven't lost any sleep because I can compartmentalize. But the problem is that comes at a detriment to me as an individual. I've lost a lot of empathy. I've lost a lot of emotions and things like that because of my career in this business. Whenever you hear a friend or a family member that has passed away and you're like, okay, well, what are we going to do now? You start to, it's almost like, am I becoming like I'm not human because of the.
Because when this happens, and these officers, bless their hearts, they see so much of it, they're just desensitized to it. And it's not that he doesn't have empathy, sympathy, etc. He's just so desensitized because he's seen so much. And this case especially was so heinous, so horrific. I mean, God bless them. God bless them.
The amount of trauma and devastation that we have seen. I've been doing crime scenes since 2002. So that's over 20 years just in crime scenes. So I've seen a lot in crime scene. And then you start thinking, well, are we damaged goods? I know emotionally, where am I? Because I don't feel emotion. Everything is compartmentalized so much that whenever you go into a scene like that, we know that, okay, this body's laying here, that body's evidence. And we've got to speak to that body there. And so we look at things as evidence. What can we what can this body tell us? And you have to put it behind, you have to put that wall up whenever you're doing that. You can't work it and say, she was pregnant, she was a mother, she's a mother to this child, she's a wife, you start adding the human aspects into it, and it'll really start messing with you. But yes, things come up that are reminders that remind, and you go right back, flashes of that scene, of all the amount of blood, of everything that you witnessed and that you've seen. Things do pop up, but I don't lose sleep. I've been blessed enough not to be able to lose sleep and be able to kind of keep things separated. I try not to take things home, but my wife can tell you that there's times when I come home and she'll just kind of back off because
I think that would be I think it would be great if I could do an interview with the wife of a detective of his caliber, because they do deal with a lot of things that we don't know about. Because if you don't have a husband in law enforcement who is a detective, who's seen the worst of the worst, who comes home with this on his mind all the time, who is working this case until the day it is prosecuted and the appeal is, and it's been through the whole process until it's final, they're always going to work that case. They're never going to let it die. So I can understand how hard it is for these women to be a wife and actually comfort these men and help them get through every day, knowing what they have seen and what they still see and what they will see in the future, because it's never ending.
She knows, either by my facial expressions or the way I'm moving or talking, that okay, he's had a rough one. She's there if I want to talk. She's there. But when we first got married, she said, "How did your work go today?"
Oh,
it was okay. So, what'd you do? You never tell me what you did. I said, okay. I said, what I did today is I had a death of a 2-year-old that was beaten to death.
Oh, God.
And she goes, whoa. Oh, she, okay. She goes, I fully understand, but just know I'm here to talk if you're willing to talk. So I'm blessed with a wife that will listen to me, not harp on me. And she knows whenever I'm at that point, let's just give him some time and he'll come back to me. But there are times that you just kind of separate. There's times that I want to go home and I just want to sit, nobody talk to me, nobody bother me. I don't want to go to no events around people. I just want to be, and that happens quite a bit.
Aspect of it is a lot of people don't realize in this line of work, our families take a punishment and beating on this too, because they're having to deal with our emotional responses. Like you said, sometimes my wife has actually made a comment that I appear cold. Sometimes I'm sorry, we've been conditioned to the point of, like he said, when we show up and then we see a body, that's evidence. I can't sit here and dwell on thinking that's a daughter or a sister or somebody. It would drive me insane.
Yeah.
So we see as evidence and evidence only. That's always the biggest question we always get when they ask us about our job is, how do you deal with the dead bodies? We don't see them, unfortunately, we don't see them as human at that point. We can reflect on that later on.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we can't.
And we know, they're humans or somebody's dad, father, son, whatever. We understand that. But when you go into it, you can't go into it with that mentality. You got to go into it. This is evidence. We're here to do a job. That person, that body is speaking, and we got to be the ones to hear it. So,
all right. With that, we're going to turn this off. I mean, I think it's quite interesting, and I really appreciate their take on this. I'm glad that they spoke. I'm glad that we could listen to it. I'm glad that we could hear their story about this story, because it is the facts. It's the facts of what happened. Okay, now, I'm sorry about that sound thing. I don't know what's going on. I don't know if it's something between the laptop and the earbuds and the connection over here. I don't know what it is, but it drives me insane. I'm sorry that happened. Now let's move on to the next part of what we're going to do. We're going to go over this appellate. Okay, we're going to go over the appeal. We started talking about this the other day, but when I realized this appeal was 72 pages long, I knew I did not have time to finish it. So we're going to get back on the appeal and talk about that. So here we go. Let me share my screen with you so you can see what I'm seeing. I always like for y'all to be able to read along if you can, or see what I'm seeing as we go. I think that's important. So, let me tell you this about this case, though. Let me go back up to where I had mine. There are no oral arguments in this case because the Supreme Court or the appeals court said no. They did it all by just briefs, and they decided not to hear it. So it's been affirmed. They're not hearing it. She's still on death row. She's staying on death row. So the next, she does have other appeals, but I don't know where she's at in the total appeal process. That is something I'm going to have to look up. So let's see if I can figure that out right quick. How many appeals has she done? Okay. You know, because they can take it all the way to the Supreme Court. It's not just the state of Texas. Okay, she has filed November 6th. Okay, so she's had the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, but she has not filed a habeas petition yet. So this is the only thing that she's done so far. She probably needs an attorney, etc., to file her habeas. Anyway, so let's keep going and get back on this appeal, and let's talk about it. Now, this is the exact appeal that we're talking about. That was filed and heard, and they affirmed it. So she won nothing. None of her points were accepted. That's it. We know the facts of the case. Okay, unless you, well, I don't know. I don't think we want to go back to the facts because we have the facts right there. Now, we're going to talk about Taylor right now. Now, let's go back and talk about this right here, though. At the age of 17, appellant gave birth to her first child, Emerson, with her then boyfriend, Donald Whiteside. And we're talking about Taylor Parker right now. The couple eventually split, and the appellant began dating and later married another man named Tommy Wakase. At the age of 21, appellant gave birth to her second child, a son named Trey, with Wakase. She had to be induced because of a condition called preeclampsia, a pregnancy complication characterized by elevated blood pressure and protein in the urine. Due to this complication, appellant decided to undergo a tubal ligation to prevent further pregnancies. A tubal ligation can, in some circumstances, be reversed. The tubal ligation eventually failed. 2 years after giving birth to Trey, the appellant had an ectopic pregnancy. An ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy where the egg implants in the fallopian tube instead of the uterus. And during exploratory surgery to resolve the pregnancy, doctors discovered that the appellant had complex cysts and scarring from endometriosis. Endometriosis is a condition where the lining of the uterus grows outside the uterus. Now, with the appellant under anesthesia, this is what I was talking about a while ago. And this is where she became upset. And this is where she was forced into early menopause, which also is a condition that can cause women a lot of mental distress and mental problems. So early menopause, let me look at something right here. By early hysterectomy. And this is in no means any support for Taylor, because I have none. I have none. This is just what the hysterectomy caused for her. So if the ovaries were removed, estrogen drops to near zero overnight, and symptoms begun within just a few weeks. This is called surgical menopause. Symptoms are often more intense than natural menopause, so it's even harder. Hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings, dryness, sleep problems, bone density loss, and higher cardiovascular risk. So if this happens before the age of 40, it's considered a premature menopause. If the uterus was removed but the ovaries were left in place, this does not cause that. But we know that her everything was taken out at that point. So that is, I mean, if only the cervix was removed, which is considered a partial hysterectomy, you still have the menopause, but it's just a little different. Here's the key takeaway from it. Removing the ovaries, immediate menopause. Removing the uterus but keeping the ovaries just causes earlier menopause by several years. So this is what happened to her. Now let's go back to we'll go back to reading. So in this hysterectomy, doctors removed the uterus, cervix, and one of her ovaries because the other one was already not good. When appellant woke up after the surgery, she flew off the handle and asked why Wakase didn't wake her up so she could make the decision. Because again, we found out from her mother that herself, the mother, Shayna Pryor, and Tommy made the decision that Taylor did not make any of the decision to get her hysterectomy. Okay. Now, the appellant and the Wackesy divorced in 2017. Soon after, appellant began dating Hunter Parker. The couple married in 2018, and during her relationship with Parker, appellant asked multiple friends to serve as a surrogate because she wanted to have more children, but could not because of the hysterectomy. The appellant and Parker divorced in 2019. Appellant then began dating Wade Griffin. Several witnesses at a trial testified that appellant was obsessed with him, and he would be ecstatic around him, even though you could tell he didn't feel the way about her. And he has, okay, but this is not in here, but he has even made statements he never told her he loved her, and that the only reason why she was still in his home with the other child was because she was supposedly pregnant and he always wanted to be a parent. He had always wanted his children to have children, but never had a chance. He saw this as his chance to be a father. Now, appellant began, let's see, the state introduced evidence of several instances when appellant went to great lengths to keep Griffin in the relationship. Appellant told Griffin she was pregnant in January of 2020. And the following month, the appellant purchased a silicone moon belly online, as well as customized ultrasounds, prepared a nursery in Griffin's home, and had maternal photo shoots, held a gender reveal party, and chose the name for the baby. The appellant's original due date was in late September of 2020. It passed without the appellant giving birth. Appellant told Griffin that she would be induced or have a C-section at the Titus Regional Medical Center in Mount Pleasant, Texas, on October the 5th, 2020. On the morning of October the 5th, Griffin's house caught on fire. Okay, so the exact day she's supposed to have this baby, she catches the house on fire. Now, in a later interview, he states that where this fire started, there was nothing under that house that could start a fire. That's when he realized she started that fire. So see, he already knew something was extremely wrong. Hey, Cinderella, how you doing, girl? So good to see you. Glad you came in today. I hope you weren't here when I had the debacle, the problem with my damn sound issue. Is all of a sudden it's like the sound was just gone and I could not get my mic to come back on. I thought, oh my God, I'm losing my whole live stream. Anyway, it's so good to see you. So I thought today we would go back and actually talk about this appeal because it was 72 pages long. I did not have the time to look at the whole thing the other day. So we're going back to where we dropped off. So, so good, so good. So we started about 10 o'clock and there's just a lot of things we talked about today. This is kind of a long live stream, but I wanted to talk about it today because this is the last time I'm going to touch on Taylor Parker. I just felt like I did not get everything out that I wanted to say on my last live stream about her. So I'm going to finish this up today. And I don't care if it takes me 3 hours to do it. Okay, so this is kind of a listening. Again, it's kind of a listening story. Okay, so we'll continue on. But so good to see you today. I'm always happy to see my friends. Okay, here we go. Now, the appellant told Griffin that she would be induced or have the C-section at Titus. Now, on the morning of October the 5th, Griffin's house caught on fire. He was able to put out the fire with a water hose. Later that morning, the medical center received a bomb threat and had to evacuate. Appellant blamed both of these events on her mother, Shauna Pryor. Now, we also know that she called in the bomb threat to the medical center because, again, she's trying to find a way to not have no place to have this baby. They couldn't induce. She's got a problem now, right? What's she going to do about this baby? Now, in the beginning of our show, remember, I went back and told you that on October the 7th, her and Reagan had a girls' day out, and they went shopping and did a few things together. Then on October the 8th, Taylor showed up at Reagan's home to bring her a baby present for her baby because, their due dates were close. And then, of course, on October the 9th, she shows up again to do the deed. So see, she basically groomed Taylor. Taylor actually groomed Reagan into believe that they were close friends and that she cared about her, with really her whole plan was to take this baby from day one. Okay, now here we go. It's just horrific. It is. Oh boy. Appellant then told Griffin that in order to avoid her mother, she had decided to travel to Idabel, Oklahoma to give birth at McCurtain Memorial Hospital. Now, on the morning of October the 9th, Appellant sent Griffin to drop off these hogs in Winewood, Oklahoma, and then to meet her at the hospital in Idabel. Instead of traveling to Idabel, the appellant went to the home of Reagan Hancock, whom appellant knew was pregnant, and arrived at 7:30 a.m. What followed was characterized by the state's slaughtered woman in her home and a missing baby and a fetal abduction. The crime scene techniques, Mark Sullivan testified that Reagan was attacked in several places around the house with multiple strikes at each location, and she continued standing and walking while bleeding. The assault continued while Reagan was on the floor. Now listen, I talked about this just a few minutes ago. Reagan fought for her baby. She could see what's going on. She knew she was going to end up dying. She tried so hard to keep this woman from taking that baby. The details are horrific, and let me give a trigger warning right now. Okay. Thank God for the prosecutor in this case. Thank God. The medical examiner, Dr. Melinda Flores, testified that Reagan had 113 sharp force injuries, 15 stab wounds, and 98 incised wounds. She had 2 wounds perforated Reagan's jugular vein. Several went all the way to the bone. That Reagan also suffered 39 blunt force injuries, primarily to her face and head, as well as a broken nose and 5 skull fractures. Now, I talked about this a while ago that she had taken the sand that was in this mason jar that was from her wedding. You know, we all have treasures from our wedding that we display around our house. Even to this day, I know I do. And she had taken that mason jar with 4 pounds of sand on it in it and kept hitting her in the head with it. And through the math, we discovered that was 300 to 500 pounds of force every time she hit her in the head with it. That's a lot. This woman fought. She wanted to live. She wanted to save her baby. Okay. Dr. Flores testified the injuries to Reagan's head indicated that she may have been hit in the head by a hammer. Dr. Flores also testified that there was evidence of possible strangulation. Reagan lost so much blood in the attack that some of her wounds did not even bleed due to low blood pressure. After murdering Reagan, appellant performed a crude C-section to remove the unborn child, Braxton. The appellant cut a large incised wound going across Reagan's lower abdomen with her uterus coming through it. The uterus was also open. The appellant also removed the placenta and the umbilical cord. Now, here's the thing about this baby that we talked about in the beginning of the show. The baby was alive. The baby could have survived. But the crucial mistake that Taylor made was not realizing while she's cutting, the blood is flowing out of mom over here. She's also cutting the blood supply off from this baby. So therefore, the baby was blood deprived, oxygen deprived, and that is why this baby actually ended up passing away instead of surviving, which is horrific. And I'm sorry, and that's a trigger warning. Okay, now. Cell tower data showed that the appellant left Reagan's house between 9:09 and 9:14 a.m. At 9:36 a.m., appellant was stopped by Trooper Lee Shavers after he observed her driving erratically, speeding and almost hitting another vehicle. After contacting the appellant, Trooper Shavers observed an umbilical cord going down into the appellant's pants and a baby that was not breathing and appeared very limp and kind of white in color. 2 ambulances transported the appellant and Braxton to the McCurtain Memorial Hospital. Now, appellant was arrested at the hospital, and Braxton was later pronounced dead. The appellant was charged with capital murder. The state's theory at trial that the appellant intentionally caused the death of Reagan and was then and there in the course of committing and attempting to commit the offense of kidnapping of Braxton. The jury found the appellant guilty of capital murder as alleged in the indictment and answered the punishment phase with special issues in favor of the death penalty. Sufficiency of evidence. In the first point of error, appellant argues that the evidence is insufficient to support that the aggravating factor of kidnapping or attempted kidnapping occurred. Appellant does not contest that the evidence is sufficient to show that she committed the murder of Reagan. Appellant only contends that the state failed to prove that Braxton was born and is alive for purposes of kidnapping or attempting to kidnap. Appellant asked the court to reform their judgment of convictions from capital murder to first-degree murder, and we overruled the appellant's first point of error. So, applicable law, and this is in regard to sufficiency. We review a challenge to the sufficiency of the evidence under the standard of review set forth in Jackson versus Virginia. Evidence is legally sufficient to support a conviction if, when viewing all the evidence in the light most favorable to the verdict, any rational juror could have found that the essential elements of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. McPherson versus State. Okay. When conducting a sufficiency review, we consider all the evidence admitted at trial, including pieces of evidence that may have been improperly admitted. Okay, and Winfrey versus State. Now, I'm not going to read all of the cases that there are talking or referring to in here because it would take so much longer. So we're not going to read the citings. So we do not sit as the 13th juror. We do not substitute our judgment for that of the fact finder by reevaluating the weight and credibility of the evidence. And this is Edwards versus State. The jury is permitted to draw a reasonable inference from the evidence adduced at trial, Metcalf versus State. Additionally, the jury may use common sense, common knowledge, personal experience, and observations from life when drawing its inferences, Acosta versus State. The sufficiency of the evidence is measured against the hypothetically correct jury charge, defined by the statutory elements as modified by the charging instruments, Mallet versus State. The hypothetically correct jury charge is one that accurately states the law is authorized by the indictment and does not increase the state's burden of proof and adequately describes the offense for which the defendant is charged. Here are the elements. A person commits the offense of capital murder if the person commits murder as defined under Section 19.02 B1, and number 2, the person intentionally commits the murder in the course of committing or attempting to commit kidnapping. A person commits the offense of kidnapping if he intentionally or knowingly abducts another person. A person is defined as an individual, and an individual is defined as a human being who has been born and is alive. A person commits the offense of criminal attempt if, with specific intent to commit an offense, he does an act amounting to more than just mere preparation that tends but fails to effect that the commission of the offense is intended. We have construed that the attempt statute to draw an imaginary line that separates an act that amounts to no more than just mere preparation from an act that tends but fails to effect the commission of the offense, and that's in Swenson versus State. The precise intent of Section 15.01, 15.01 is to punish actions for intended offenses while allowing interventions before an act which could constitute the offense itself occurs. Appellant does not challenge the sufficiency of the evidence to support the murder of Reagan. Instead, the appellant only challenges the sufficiency of the state's evidence to show that Braxton was born and is alive during the kidnapping or attempted kidnapping. We reject this argument for 2 reasons. First, when viewing the evidence in light of the most favorable of the verdict, a rational juror could find, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Braxton was born and is alive at the time the appellant kidnapped her. Second, there was sufficient circumstantial evidence for a rational juror to conclude, beyond a reasonable doubt, the appellant had taken a step that amounted to more than just merely preparation towards the kidnapping of Braxton. Relevant facts. Alton Crossland, a flight paramedic for LifeNet Air, was working with his partner Allison Moses on the morning of October the 9th, 2020, when they were dispatched to Trooper Schaefer's location at 9:37 a.m. They arrived on scene at 9:49, and Crossland testified to as follows. Question. Okay, when you arrived on the scene, tell the jury kind of what was going on out there. Here's the answer. We arrived on the scene, exited our vehicle, walked back to where Trooper Schaefer and the bystanders were. And when we got up to the door, there was a woman sitting in the front seat holding a newborn. We could see the baby was gray ash in color and the umbilical cord was still attached. And the Crossland further testifies, question, have you in your experience as a paramedic come across a woman who have given birth outside of the hospital, whether it be in a car at home or things of this nature? His answer was yes. Question, so when you walked up to the car and you saw the baby with the umbilical cord still attached, what's running through your mind at that time? Here's the answer. Getting the cord clamped and getting the baby into the ambulance so that we can start full-blown CPR. The difference being doing compressions and breathings, it only gets you so far. Being as an ALS provider or a paramedic, there's a different drug I can push to try to improve the outcome. Question. You mentioned the appearance of the baby was ashen. What else did you know about or did you notice about the baby? Answer. The amniotic fluid that was still on the baby was dried and flaky, signaling to us that this baby wasn't just born. It had been at least several minutes. Question. And the baby had just and that has just been born, what were you expecting to see? Answer. Ideally, when we show up, we would see a baby that was kind of pinkish in color and crying. Question. And the woman holding the baby, was she still there sitting in the car? Answer. Yes. Question. When you got there, okay, and she was identified to you later as Taylor Parker? Answer was yes. The question. What was she doing when you got to the scene and when you walked up to the car and saw the baby? Answer. When I walked up to the car, she seemed pretty calm, and she was just like, to us, she was very adamant that if we took the baby, it had to go to Idabel. She seemed fairly calm. Question. And when you ask her about how she had this baby or more circumstances, what did she tell you? Answer. That she was driving down the road, felt her water break, and the baby just came out. Okay. Now, let's hang on for a second and just talk about that. There's no way in hell that that's how this happened, and we know that. Any of us have had children know that it's just not that simple. Your water doesn't break and a baby just fall out. And then there's the fact that there was no mess in the car of water breaking, etc. She still had her pants on. Who has a baby in a car and still has your pants on? Think about that. You don't care. You don't take the time to put your pants back on. So there are the red flags that started been showing right there. They knew something was extremely wrong with the answers and the color of the baby. So, question. And when you heard her say that, was your impression that the baby was born in that car that she was sitting in? Answer was no. Question. And why not? The birth of a baby is not very neat or clean process. There was no blood or amniotic fluid in the car or in the seat where she was sitting. To us, it was obvious this baby was not born in that car. That Braxton had not been born in the appellant's car was later confirmed. Question. When you cut the umbilical cord, what did you notice? Answer. That normally when you cut it, you get a small amount of blood in it, even when it's clamped. But when we cut it, the blood seemed like it was separated already, kind of like the serum from the plasma, and almost looked like it had been blood clots in it. Question. What do you think about that? Was this unusual? Answer. It told us, again, reasserted to us that it had been several minutes since that baby was born. It was not recent. Question. So when you first arrived at the scene, you were under the impression that this baby had maybe been born just minutes before your arrival. And based on what you were seeing and your assessment, was that matching up? Answer was no. Then Crosland testifies that the treatment on Braxton was started. Question. Once you were in the back of this ambulance with that baby, what did you all do? Answer. We got an IV or an intravenous IV started in the left lower leg. We started giving IV fluids and giving doses of epinephrine. We were continuing CPR. We then intubated the patient so we could breathe for her. Question. At that point, did the baby have a pulse? Answer. No, she did not. Okay. Question. Was the baby breathing? Answer. No, she was not. Question. Okay, when you first got there and saw the baby, did you notice any signs of life? Answer. No. Question. Once you got her in the ambulance and you were able to administer medication, what type of medication were you giving? Answer. Epinephrine. Question. What's that going to do? Answer. It's epinephrine, also known as adrenaline. It causes contractility of the heart, and it helps restore a pulse in conjunction with CPR. Question. Okay, and the jury has heard that the baby was a baby girl. Was that? And the answer was yes. Question. Elton, y'all decided that the closest place is going to be Idabel. How long did it take you to get there? Question. Answer. I'm not sure off the top of my head. If we could go back to the first page, it's got the times on it. Looks like it took like 34 minutes. Think about that. The child, okay, so she cut this baby. They had the big fight. She cuts the baby out. She leaves that house at like 9 something. And by the time, and then it's another 34 minutes before they even get to a hospital. This baby, there's no way that baby would have survived, period. Had she tied off the umbilical cord when she first took that baby, it might have saved that baby. It might have. I'm not sure. Okay. Elton. Okay, so then the question was, during the 34 minutes of transport from DeKalb to Idabel, what are you doing to the baby in the back? Answer. We're continuing CPR, continuing to ventilate her with a bag valve mask, continuing to give EPI every 3 to 5 minutes and trying to get her warm. Question. Were you eventually able to get a pulse back? Answer was yes. Okay, so by the time you arrived at the Idabel hospital, the baby had a pulse? The answer was yes. And the question is, and is that reflected here on the vital signs taken at 10:37 that there was a pulse? So it had already been an hour and maybe 5 to 10 minutes of this baby struggling. Okay. Answer. One of the OB nurses met us outside. I guess there had been some miscommunication. I think they thought we were coming in with just a baby that had been delivered. We came out of the back of the truck and the heart rate was less than 60. So we're still trying to doing, just chest compressions and she was still not breathing. So we were breathing for her. So they took us up to the second floor to their OB unit. Crossland testified that as he observed, no cuts, scrapes, abrasions, or visible injuries on Braxton. On cross-examination, Crossland further explained in his observations about Braxton's heartbeat. Question. But you said there was a heartbeat at some point. Answer. Yes. Question. Now, did you know that because you had placed monitors on the chest? Answer. We saw the changes on the monitor, which signaled to us we had her on an end-tidal capnography, a waveform capnography. On the monitor, we saw a spike in that reading, which is in cardiac arrest, signifies a return of circulation. Question, but it doesn't indicate whether it's going to be maintained or not. Answer, it does not. Question, and was it just very faint? Answer, the reading was. The reading was very good and it stayed. Now, the pulse that we felt, I could actually palpate it with my fingers and feel it, but it was very weak. Okay, on redirect examination, Crossland testified. Question, I remember talking to you and you said when y'all got the pulse back, and by back, if the baby is stillborn and born without a pulse, there's no pulse to get back. Does that make sense? Answer is correct. This is telling us this baby was born alive. It was not a stillbirth. Okay. Question. From time to time, you get the pulse back. You're excited and thought we may have saved this baby. Answer. Yes. From Ottawa back to New Boston, we were on cloud 9. We thought we had done something that, in all honesty, we thought was just futile from the time we left the scene. But it's a newborn. We've got to do something. So when we got the pulse back, we thought, wow, this is awesome. Question. And the last question that you were asked, that the baby was never alive, you didn't know what the baby's condition was when she was taken via C-section from her mother's womb? Answer, no, I do not. Question. You saw the baby at the time later, and your testimony was the conditions was that she had not just been born. Answer, that's correct. Question, and if the medical records reflect that the baby's time of death was sometime around 1 o'clock p.m., that the baby was alive from when you got a heartbeat back in the ambulance to the time that she was declared deceased? Answer was yes. So that baby did live, and that baby was born alive, and they did everything they could to save that baby. Now, Crossland's testimony was corroborated by Dr. William Herron, the only doctor in McCurtain County, Oklahoma, that delivers babies. Dr. Herron testified that he had 41 years of experience in the medical field. In all at McCurtain, he's been there at McCurtain Memorial Hospital. Dr. Herron received a call to come to the hospital on the morning of October the 9th, 2020, while still at home. Braxton barely had a pulse and no spontaneous respirations when Dr. Herron arrived. Dr. Herron testified. Question. Okay, Dr. Herron, in your training and experience, an infant 7 pounds, approximately 35 weeks gestation, is that an infant who, absent of any conditions, is viable? Answer, yes. Question. There's also notes at 10:50 the pulse was 58. It says pacing. Is that because of the answer, external pacemaker? Yes. Dr. Herron further testified just as Crossland did. Okay, doctor, the questions I'm about to ask you are based on things that have been asked on other witnesses in the courtroom over the past couple of weeks. The baby, as we know, was brought into the hospital there at 10:26, 10:27, and based on the information given by Taylor Parker to law enforcement at 9:36, she tells us the baby's about 35 minutes old. So I'm telling you that information to ask you that if, according to Taylor Parker, the baby being generous, being born around 9 a.m.? Answer was yes. I remember you telling me that the time was spanned maybe about 40 minutes, from 9 to 9:40, 9:45, when LifeNet arrived. If that baby had been dead the entire time, do you believe they would have been able to get a pulse back? His answer is no. Question. I remember you told me that essentially logic tells you that the baby was alive because they were able to get a pulse back. His answer is yes. And later on redirect examination, the question is, okay, so back to my original question to you on direct about if the baby was born deceased about 9 a.m. and the paramedics are not administering life-saving efforts until 9:45. In your expert opinion, do you believe they would have revived a stillborn or a deceased baby? The answer is no. That is not, it's not possible, really. Dr. James Scales, the physician in obstetrics and gynecology at the Genesis Prime Care Clinic, also testified for the state. Dr. Scales testified that over the course of over 20 years, he had delivered approximately 200 babies a year and was familiar with C-section procedures. Dr. Scales testified that Reagan was not having complications during her pregnancy and that Braxton had no abnormalities. Now, Dr. Scales further testified that he was surprised that Braxton had no visible injuries or knife nicks because even a trained doctor going through layers of skin very carefully and relatively slow sometimes will nick a baby. And this is what Dr. Scales explains. Question. Okay, the medical examiner and actually, I believe it was the doctors from the Idabel Hospital weighed the baby and measured the baby. Those results were that she was 7 pounds and 18.75 inches. So when we're talking about a woman who's 35 weeks pregnant and that a baby that size, would that be, in your experience, a viable baby? His answer was yes. Question. And doctor, do you recall us showing you some of the autopsy photos in this case of Reagan? Answer was yes. Question. Okay, and we specifically showed you the one of the cut and the uterus and the back of the uterus. Do you remember that? Answer. I remember it. Question. Okay, now I have to give you a trigger warning because it's going to get pretty kind of like things we don't really want to hear, but this is the appeal and these are the merits and this is the case. All right. He goes, and I recall you said it was maybe a little bit bigger than would be necessary, but it wasn't that bad. Answer was correct. Question. So your opinion, I think, was that the person who had performed that C-section had taken some reasonable care as far as cutting into the uterus. Answer, they didn't do that. Oh, God. Lastly, the state called Shawnee Yeager. While Yeager was held at the Bowie County's bi-state jail, she met the appellant. Yeager was a jail trustee who helped do laundry. A trustee is an inmate who displayed good behavior and is permitted to assist with jail operations and move about the jail. Due to her trustee status, Yeager was able to speak to the appellant. Yeager testified the following about her conversations with the appellant. Question. Did Taylor Parker discuss with you that she had convinced her boyfriend, Wade Griffin, that she was pregnant? The answer was yes. Question. And did she give you a lot of detail on that, or did she just tell you that she had convinced him she was pregnant? Answer. No, not a lot of detail, but he believed her, that he believed that she was pregnant. Question. She's believable, isn't she? Answer. Very believable, because she's a great manipulator. Okay. Now, question. All right, I want to talk to you about, did Taylor Parker tell you about when she went to cut the baby out of Reagan Hancock? Did she tell you about that? The answer was yes. All right, the question is, I think you said that started with a knife. Now, this is going to be trigger warning right here. We've kind of discussed this the other day, but I mean, it's part of the appeal. We've got to read it. Yes. Okay, all right. I think you said that she started with a knife. Yes, here's the answer. She started with a knife that was there, and it didn't work as well as she thought it would. So she went to her vehicle where she had some sort of a kit that she had used on animals, and it had a scalpel. Question, all right. So she did have a scalpel, and did she use the scalpel to finish cutting the baby out? Answer, yes. Okay. Question, and then what happened after the baby was cut out, Shauna? Answer, she said she placed the baby up against Reagan's cheek and told her, tell mama bye. Question, so the baby is alive? Answer, yes, ma'am. Question, and she told the baby, tell mama bye? Answer, yeah. Okay, question, all right. Hold on a second. Did she tell you that she was, what happened after that, Shauna? Did she get in her car and leave? Answer, she says she was going to the hospital. Question, okay. And was it going to the hospital because the baby is in distress or anything like that? Answer, no. Okay. Question, she was on the way to hospital. In your discussions with me, you said that you believe she wanted to make a record that she had the baby at the hospital. Answer, yes, ma'am. Question, all right. On her way to the hospital, what happens to the baby? Answer, she says she looks over and the baby is not breathing and she pulled over. Question, okay, she pulled over. Answer, yes. Question, she didn't tell you that she got pulled over. Answer, no. Question, she told you that she pulled over. Answer, she pulled over. Question, And you then tells you, what did she tell you about the cord, the umbilical cord and all that? Answer, that it was coming out of her pants. Question, and the first responders just answer, assumed that she had given birth to that baby. Question, but she didn't tell them she hadn't. Answer, she didn't say that she didn't say she told them. She says that they just assumed based on this umbilical cord. Now we're going to talk about the analysis. Now we're going to talk about kidnapping. Okay. The evidence presented at trial, when viewed in the light of most favorable to the verdict, was sufficient for a rational juror to find beyond a reasonable doubt that Braxton was born and is alive at the time appellant kidnapped or attempted to kidnap her. Based on Crossland's and Dr. Heron's testimonies, a rational juror could believe beyond a reasonable doubt that Braxton was not born in the vehicle. Crossland testified that the amniotic fluid on Braxton was dried and flaky, and furthermore that Crossland testified that when the umbilical cord was cut, the blood in the cord was already separating and clotting. Based on this testimony, a rational juror could have concluded that Braxton had been born elsewhere and sometime before the appellant was stopped by Trooper Shavers. A rational juror could have also believed that the LifeNet paramedics were able to restore Braxton's heartbeat. Crossland testified that the heartbeat monitored on end-tidal capnography or waveform capnography is significant a return of circulation. Dr. Heron also testified that Braxton barely had a pulse when he arrived at the hospital. Based on the testimony, a rational juror could have concluded that Braxton was born alive. Both Crossland and Dr. Herons testified that it would have been impossible for the paramedics, based on the known timeline, to restore the heartbeat to a stillborn baby. A rational juror could have credited the testimony and inferred that Braxton must have been born alive at the time the appellant's crude C-section, because, if not, the paramedics would not have been able to later restore Braxton's heartbeat. Furthermore, Drs. Heron and Scales both testified that Braxton's was viable, and Dr. Scales testified that the appellant's crude C-section did not harm Braxton and was not poorly performed. A rational juror could have believed that this testimony and inferred that because Braxton was not injured during the C-section and was otherwise viable, she was born alive. Moreover, a rational juror could have also believed, and this is Yeager's testimony, and credited appellant's confession that Braxton was born alive. Yeager testified that the appellant, after performing the C-section, placed the baby up to Reagan's cheek and told her, tell mama bye. Afterwards, Yeager testified that the appellant took Braxton to the hospital, but did not do so because Braxton was in distress. A rational juror could have inferred from the appellant's actions that Braxton was born alive at the time of the C-section because the appellant would not have told a stillborn baby to tell mama bye or take a stillborn baby to a hospital. Based on Yeager's testimony, a rational juror could have concluded that Braxton was born alive during the C-section, and the appellant was taking Braxton to the hospital until the appellant pulled over because she realized Braxton was no longer breathing, at which point the appellant tried to make it appear as though she had just had the baby before she was stopped by Trooper Shavers. This is consistent with Crossland's testimony that Braxton was not born inside the vehicle based on the physical observations that Crossland made at the scene. Now let's talk about number 2, the attempted kidnapping. Alternatively, the evidence presented at trial, when viewed in the light most favorable to the verdict, was sufficient for a rational juror to find beyond a reasonable doubt that the appellant had taken a step that amounted to more than just mere preparations toward kidnapping Braxton. The medical testimony introduced at the trial showed the appellant's crude C-section appeared to be designed to secure a live baby. Dr. Scales testified that the C-section did not harm Braxton and was not poorly performed. Dr. Flores, the medical examiner, testified that Reagan's injuries were focused on the upper body, particularly the head and neck areas. A juror can infer from this testimony that the appellant's assault was directed away from the location of the baby in an attempt to avoid harm to the baby while the appellant was murdered. The evidence admitted at trial also circumstantially proved that the appellant wanted a live baby. The state introduced evidence the appellant was unable to get pregnant due to a hysterectomy and faked a pregnancy with Griffin in order to keep him in a relationship. Moreover, the jury heard evidence that the appellant purchased a silicone moon belly online, as well as customized ultrasounds, repaired a nursery in Griffin's home, and had maternal photo shoots, held a gender reveal party, and chose a name for the baby, all to further the story of the fake pregnancy. A rational juror could conclude, based on the evidence, that the appellant intended to kidnap Braxton alive to complete her fake pregnancy story. In sum, the evidence was sufficient for a rational jury to conclude the appellant was attempting to kidnap Braxton. Appellant's crude C-section was an act that amounted to more than just mere preparations that tended to effect a kidnapping. Even if Braxton was not born and is alive, appellant simply failed to effect the commission of the offense of kidnapping. Although kidnapping, the last proximate act needed for the crime would of course constitute an attempt. We have concluded that the legislatures did not intend to draw the imaginary line that close to the offense. Okay, this is Swenson. Okay, we've talked about Swenson before. Now, in presence of this case, appellant C-section was an act that amounted to more than mere preparation and was sufficient to support the aggravating element of attempted kidnapping. Let's talk about the conclusion. When viewing the evidence in light most favorable to the verdict, a rational juror could find, a rational juror could find beyond a reasonable doubt that Braxton was born and is alive at the time the appellant kidnapped her. There's Brooks and McPherson and Jackson. These are other cases they've cited. Alternatively, a rational jury could find beyond a reasonable doubt the appellant attempted to kidnap Braxton. And consequently, the evidence is sufficient to support appellant's judgment of conviction for capital murder. Appellant's first point of error is overruled. Change in venue. Okay. In her second and third points of error, appellant contends that the trial court erred by denying her motion for change of venue. Specifically, the appellant argues that the trial court erred under the Code of Criminal Procedures, point of error 2, and violated her rights under Due Process Clause, point of error 3, by denying her motion for change of venue. We overruled on both points of error. Points of error number 2, Code of Criminal Procedures. A change of venue may be granted if the defendant establishes that there exists in the county where the prosecution is commenced so great a prejudice against him that he cannot obtain a fair and impartial trial. Tracy versus State. Okay. When a defendant seeks a change of venue based on publicity about the case, she must show that the publicity was pervasive, prejudicial, and inflammatory. Sandoval versus State. With widespread publicity by itself is not considered inherently a prejudicial. Tracy, which is another case they're citing. Okay. The defendant must show an actual identifiable prejudice attributable to pretrial publicity on the part of the community from which the members of the jury will come. We reviewed a trial court's ruling on a motion to change venue for abuse of discretion, and I will uphold the trial court's decision. It is within the zone of reasonable disagreement. The two primary means of discerning whether publicity is pervasive or that the hearing on motion to change the venue and the testimony of the venue members at voir dire. In Tracy, this court reviewed a challenge to denial of a motion for change of venue in a death penalty case originating from Bowie County, the same county that the appellant's case originates from. The defendant, Tracy, murdered a corrections officer at the Barry B. Telford unit in New Boston, Texas. On appeal, the defendant argued that there was excessive or prejudicial pretrial publicity in Bowie County and that Telford unit, where Officer Davison was employed, is an important economic entity in Bowie County, creating the likelihood that a fair and impartial trial would be impossible. The defendant filed a motion for change of venue supported by two affidavits. The state filed a convening affidavit in its response to the motion. At a hearing on the motion, the defendant called Brent McQueen, a fact investigator for the defense. The state called two witnesses in rebuttal, Bowie County Judge James Carlo and Bowie County Precinct 2 Commissioner Tom Whitten. Testimony at the hearing supports that the conclusion that media coverage was not extensive, inflammatory, or prejudicial. Although there were a number of print and digital newspaper articles and social media posts relating to the case, there was no estimate of how many people in Bowie County actually received or read those articles. A large part of the testimony related to the comments made on the articles online, shares on personal Facebook pages, and other reactions on social media pages, such as likes, in response to the articles being posted online. But testimony has also showed that many of the people commenting, posting, and responding to the articles were not even Bowie County residents and would not be in the jury pool. Furthermore, news stories that are accurate and objective in their coverage are generally considered by this court not to be prejudicial or inflammatory. Appellant complains that of articles that accurately depict the incident in which Officer Davison was killed, they are not viewed as whole, inflammatory, or prejudicial. The media coverage was not pervasive, prejudicial, or extensive, and it did not permeate that the Bowie County community to such an extent that the fair and impartial trial would be impossible. The trial judge acted within the zone of reasonable disagreement in denying the motion to change the venue based on the presence of media coverage. The record supports the trial court's findings that the appellant could receive a fair trial in Bowie County. We hold the trial court was within its discretion in denying the appellant's motion to change its venue. His second point of error is overruled. This case shares similar facts with Tracy. The appellant files a motion for change of venue, supported by her own affidavit and the affidavit of two credible residents of Bowie County. The state opposes the motion with its own contravening affidavits. After hearing the appellant's motion, McQueen, the same investigator as in Tracy, testified about the media coverage in the appellant's case, including news articles in the Texarkana Gazette. Appellant also introduced evidence of comments and interactions on various Facebook groups made by social media users from Bowie County. In rebuttal, the state called three witnesses: Lance Klein, the lead investigator in the appellant's case, Lance Hall, the Bowie County Emergency Management Operator, and Robert Bergerman, the mayor of Texarkana. Both Hall and Bergerman testified that they believed without a doubt that a fair and impartial jury could be seated in Bowie County. Hall also testified that reporting was accurate, and Bergerman testified that the Gazette required a subscription, so members of the public without a subscription would not be able to access the Gazette's articles. Like in Tracy, the record establishes that the media coverage was not pervasive, prejudicial, or extensive, and did not permeate the Bowie County community to such an extent that a fair and impartial trial would be impossible. The trial judge acted within the zone of reasonable disagreement in denying the motion to change the venue based on the presence of media coverage. Consequently, we cannot say that the denial of the appellant's motion to change venue was an abuse of discretion. Sandoval is the case they're stating. Appellant's second point of error is overruled. Okay. To the extent that the appellant asserts 80% of the potential jurors had heard about this case, this assertion does not change the outcome, as we noted in Gonzalez versus State. This court and other appellate courts have found trial courts within their discretion when they seated panels where 69 venue members out of 109 had seen publicity on the accused case, or 44 out of 72 had seen publicity on the defendant's case, and where 52 panelists out of 64 had seen something on the defendant's case. Likewise, we have found the trial courts within their discretion when they seated jurors with 15 venue members out of the 77 had stated that they had an opinion that could not be set aside, and were 39 out of 112 that said the same thing. Now, let's see. Out of the 180 members on the panel, 121 were familiar with this case. 58 had formed an opinion that they would not be able to set aside. Yet we emphasize that the pretrial publicity was accurate and objective and found no abuse of discretion. The large majority of the appellant's venue panel had heard about the appellant's case, and it does not render the pretrial publicity so prejudicial. And let's go on to the next point. The point of error to due process clause. The Sixth Amendment secures the criminal defendant's right to a trial by impartial jury, Skilling versus the United States. In Redu versus Louisiana, the Supreme Court of the United States addressed due process challenges to the denial of the motion for change of venue. After Redu's arrest, a moving picture film with a soundtrack was made of an interview in the jail between Redu and the sheriff of Calacio Parish. Ooh, that's hard to say. This 20-minute interview, which consisted of an interrogation by the sheriff and admissions by Redu that had been perpetrated of a bank robbery, kidnapping, and murder, was broadcast over television stations in Lake Charles, and some 24,000 people in the community saw and heard it on television. The sound film again was shown on the television the next day to an estimated audience of 53,000 people. The following day, the film again was broadcast by the same television station, and this time approximately 20,000 people saw and heard the interview on their television sets. The trial court denied Redu's motion for change of venue, and the Supreme Court of Louisiana affirmed. The Supreme Court of the United States reversed. The Supreme Court explained that what the people in the community saw on their television sets was Redu in jail, flanked by the sheriff and two state troopers, admitting in detail the commissions of the robbery, kidnapping, and murder in response to leading questions by the sheriff. To the tens of thousands of people who saw and heard it, in a very real sense, was Redu's trial, at which he pled guilty. Emphasis added, consequently, the kangaroo court proceedings that followed violated due process. Similarly, in Estes versus Texas, pretrial publicity in effect caused a bombardment of the community with the sights and sounds of a two-day hearing during which original jury panels, the petitioner, the lawyers, and the judge were highly publicized. This excessive report led to considerable disruption and denied Estes the judicial serenity and calm to which he was entitled. And in Shepard versus Maxwell, bedlam reigned at the courthouse during the trial, and newsmen took over particularly the entire courtroom, counting that most of the participants at the trial, especially Shepard. This is, in effect, put jurors into the role of celebrities. In the Supreme Court's view, this carnival atmosphere was sufficient to upset due process. The parties analyzed this case under 4 factors relevant to presuming prejudice, found in the United States versus Caselas-Toro. Okay, now, size of the community. As we recognized in Tracy, there's approximately 100,000 residents in Bowie County. This population size to the Coliseo Parish in Redo, which had a population of approximately 150,000 people. But the key difference between this case and Redo is the breadth of the dissemination of the media. In Redo, the 3 broadcasts reached 24,000, 53,000, and 20,000 people. A similar level of dissemination is not in record here. Consequently, even though the size of the community and appellant's case is similar to that of Redo, this factor weighs against the findings or presumed jurors' prejudice. Nature of the publicity. Okay, here we go. Appellant relies on 2 separate articles by the Texarkana Gazette and the TKK Today that include references to the appellant allegedly confessing to law enforcement to argue that the pretrial publicity in appellant's case included evidence of a smoking gun variety that would have invited prejudgment and a culpability. Appellant further argues that the community commentary on Facebook revealed a widespread animosity in Bowie County towards the appellant. We disagree. First, widespread publicity itself is not considered inherently prejudicial. Appellant does not challenge the accuracy of the news articles, and this court was held news stories that are accurate and objective in their coverage are generally considered by this court not to be prejudicial or inflammatory. Second, as we also recognized in Tracy, testimony showed that many of the people commenting, posting, and responding to the articles were not even in Bowie County residents and would not be in the jury pool. Third, while the appellant highlights individual inflammatory comments on Facebook posts, as we admitted in the individual inflammatory comments into evidence, there were more non-prejudicial comments opposed. And as appellant's experts conceded, he did not investigate the actual identities of any of the individuals commenting or posting on social media websites. For the reasons stated above, the mere fact that each newspaper ran articles of that certain individual's comments are posted on Facebook does not correlate with widespread dissemination in Bowie County. Appellant argues that the combined Facebook following of each newspaper account for approximately 135% of the county's population, but there's no record of evidence, unlike in Redo, to support the assertions that even a portion of that viewership read the articles. The same is likewise true to the extent the appellant relies on Facebook or other social media sources. There is no evidence in the record that those sources were pervasively shared to the same level as Redo. This factor weighs against finding a presumed juror prejudice. Item 3, time between media attention and trial. Appellant argues that the gap between the offense and the appellant's trial, a gap of less than 2 years, is not similar to the 4-year gaps that were recognized in Redo and in Patton versus Yount, as sufficient to diminish the effect of pretrial publicity. But a period of nearly 2 years had been recognized by other courts as sufficient to allow the decibel level of publicity about the crime themselves to drop and the community passions to diminish. In regards to Sonarbo, McQueen testified at the change of venue hearing that most cases don't have anywhere near the coverage that this case had received during the 2-year period. In light of all the evidence and record, this factor is neutral as to presuming juror prejudice. Number 4, does the jury decision indicate bias? In Redo, Estes, and Shepard, the jury's verdict did not undermine in any way the position of a juror bias. The defendants in those cases were convicted. In Skilling, by contrast, the jury acquitted Skilling. They acquitted Skilling of 9 insider trading counts. The Supreme Court observed that it would be odd for an appellate court to presume prejudice in a case which the juror's actions runs counter to that of presumption. Appellant's jury convicted her of charges of offenses, sentenced her to death, consistent with Redo, Estes, and Shepard. This factor weighs in favor of pursuing jurors' prejudice. Conclusion. We conclude that skilling factors weigh against the presumption of jurors' prejudice. While the appellant's jury did convict her of capital murder, this case does not bear the same hallmarks as skilling, Estes, or Shepard, where the Supreme Court recognized extensive or prejudicial pretrial publicity. The record shows that the appellant's trial did not suffer from any grossly brutal kangaroo court proceedings that infected the trial into those cases. See Redo 373 U.S. 726. Appellant's third point of error is overruled. And number 4, motion for continuance. In her fourth through the 6 points of error, appellant challenges the trial court's denial of her pretrial motion for continuance. Specifically, appellant argues that the trial court's denial of her motion for continuance violated, number 1, her right to counsel under the 6th Amendment of the United States Constitution and Article 1, Section 10 of the Texas Constitution. Point of error 4. Number 2, her right to due process under the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution and Article 1, Section 19 of the Texas Constitution, point of error number 5. And number 3, her right under Article 29.03 of the Code of Criminal Procedures, point of error 6. We overrule each point of error. Article 29.03 of the Code of Criminal Procedures provides, a criminal action may be continued on the written motion of the state or the defendant upon sufficient cause shown, which cause shall be fully set forth in the motion. A continuance may be only for as long as is necessary. Now, Texas Code of Criminal Procedures, Article 29.03. All motions for continuance must be sworn to by persons having personal knowledge of the facts relied on for the continuance. We have construed that these statutes to require a sworn written motion to preserve appellant's review from a trial judge's denial of a motion for continuance, Anderson v. State. Thus, if a party makes an unsworn oral motion for a continuance and the trial judge denies it, the party forfeits the right to complain about the judge's ruling on appeal. We have also explicitly refused to recognize a due process exception to the rule requiring motions for continuances to be written and sworn in order to be observed on appeal. Black v. State. Pretrial appellants filed a written motion for continuance, but the motion was not sworn to by the appellant in either a verification or an affidavit. Instead, the appellant relies on 4 ex parte affidavits from witnesses that the appellant attached to her motion for continuance filed in the trial court. None of these ex parte affidavits were included in the appellant's briefing. To the extent that the appellant asserts that there is ex parte affidavits are sufficient to preserve error, appellant has inadequately briefed this argument. See Texas R. APP 38.1. Appellants concursively asserts these declarations from mitigation specialists, 2 experts, and an investigator satisfy Article 29.08. At no point does the appellant explain why her unsworn motion with sworn affidavits, go away. Hang on, get rid of that. Okay. With affidavits from Article 29.08. She simply asserts that it does. Resolving this preservation of error issue in the appellant's favor would therefore require us to make the appellant's argument for her. This will not do. See Heiselbecks v. State. We overrule appellant's 4 through 6 points of error. Extraneous offenses. This is number 5. In her 7th through 11th points of error, let me just tell you this. There are 25 different points of error in this case, and so that's why it is 72 pages long. I am going to read every bit of it because I think it's important for people to listen, understand, and see the court's rulings. Okay, here we go. In her 7th through 11th points of error, the appellant challenges the admissions of extraneous offenses evidence during her trial. In her 7th point of error, appellant contends that the trial court erred in admitting extraneous offenses evidence without reasonable notice. In her 8th point of error, appellant argues that the extraneous offenses evidence was inadmissible under Rule of Evidence 404B and that the admission of the evidence affected her substantial rights. In her 9th point of error, appellant claims that the introduction of evidence was unrelated to Article 37.071, special issues during the penalty phase of her trial, affected her substantial rights. In her 10th point of error, appellant argues that the introduction of excessive extraneous offenses and the testimony violated her right to a fair trial. And in her 11th point of error, appellant contends that the introduction of evidence invoking gender stereotypes violates due process. We overrule each point of error. Point of error 7, notice. Rule of evidence 404B states the prosecutor must provide reasonable notice before the trial that the prosecution intends to introduce such evidence. Other than arising in the same transactions, it's in a case in chief for the case in chief. The spirit of Rule 404B is to allow a defendant adequately to prepare to defend against the extraneous offense's evidence. Rule 404B does not set forth a formalistic method of conveying notice and does not require it in writing. While the state should not be permitted to engage in gamesmanship by finding creative ways to convey notice without really informing the defendant of its intent to introduce extraneous offenses, the defense should not be permitted to engage in gamesmanship by claiming that the notice it received was insufficient, when the defense did in fact have actual notice of the state's intent to introduce the extraneous offenses question. We have emphasized that the purpose of Rule 404B is to prevent surprise. Okay, assuming without deciding that error was preserved, we conclude that there was no error. The state's first notice of intent to use extraneous offenses was over 150 pages in length and was served 3 months prior to the start of the trial. The state's 3 supplemental notices of intent to use extraneous offenses, like the lengthily described additional extraneous acts that occurred during the appellant's pretrial incarceration and were served between 1 and 2 months prior to the trial. Tellingly, appellant's trial counsel did not argue surprise when the trial court granted him a running objection under 404B. The record of this case tends to support that the conclusion that the defense did indeed have actual notices of the state's intent to introduce the extraneous offenses, and hence the trial court's decision to admit the evidence is supported by the record and must be upheld. Appellant's 7th point of error is overruled. Point of error 8, Rule 404B, admissibility. Rule of evidence 404B provides that the evidence of a crime, wrong, or other act is not admissible to prove a person's character in order to show that on a particular occasion the person acts in accordance with the character. However, this evidence may be admissible for another purpose, such as proving motive, opportunity, intent, preparation plan, knowledge, identity, absence of mistake, or lack of accident. Now, the exceptions listed under 404B are neither mutually exclusive nor collectively exhaustive. Rule 404B is a rule of inclusion rather than exclusion. The rule excludes only the evidence that is offered or will be used solely for the purpose of proving bad characters and hence conduct in conformity with that bad character. Okay. Evidence is introduced for the purposes other than character conformity, has relevance to a fact of consequences in the case, or remains free of any other constitutional or statutory provisions, is admissible. The admissible evidence is within the discretion of the trial court and will not be overturned absent an abuse of discretion. This is to say, as long as the trial court's ruling was within the zone of reasonable disagreement, the appellant court should affirm. A trial court's ruling will generally be upheld if the evidence shows that, number 1, an extraneous transaction is relevant to the material non-propensity issue, and number 2, the probative value of that evidence is not substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice, confusion of the issue, or misleading of the jury. In her briefing, appellant challenges 4 pieces of admitted extraneous evidence. Number 1, evidence the appellant asked a witness to be surrogates for a 6-figure compensation. Number 2, evidence the appellant claimed to be the heiress to a syrup fortune and entered contracts to buy large amounts of land. Number 3, evidence the appellant is normal, has no mental health issues, and simply chooses to lie when she wants to. And number 4, evidence of a particularly strange tale that the appellant supposedly spun about her mother hiring the Mexican mafia to kill her. We address each in turn. Surrogacy. At the trial, the state introduced evidence from Abby Bell and Michaela Curtis, who both testified that the appellant asked them to be surrogates in exchange for money. The trial court could have reasonably concluded that this evidence was admissible as evidence of the appellant's motive and intent. The evidence at the trial showed that the appellant underwent a hysterectomy that was authorized by her then husband due to medical complications during an ectopic pregnancy. After she divorced Legacy and married Parker, she was unable to get pregnant and sought surrogates because she wanted more children. The appellant could not get pregnant and needed surrogates was relevant to the appellant's fake pregnancy and efforts to keep her and Griffins together in a relationship. It's within the zone of reasonable disagreement for the trial court to conclude that the surrogacy evidence was admissible for the permissible purpose of establishing appellant's motive and intent for murdering Reagan and kidnapping Braxton. Heirs to assert fortune. You know, it's funny, but it's not funny because of the extreme of her lies. They are so extreme, but it tells you the type of person that she is, right? The state introduced evidence from Rusty Lowe, a real estate broker with Century 21 Harvey Properties in Paris, Texas. Lowe testified in December of 2019. A woman identifying herself as Taylor Parker or Taylor Griffin called him to inquire about a 1,500-acre tract of land on the right edge of Bowie County valued at approximately $4.7 million. Lowe testified that when he asked appellant how she was going to pay for this property, she responded that she was the heir to a syrup company. The trial court had reasonably concluded that this evidence was admissible as evidence of appellant's motive. After having been rejected by the men in her life, the state sought to prove that the appellant did not want to lose her newest boyfriend, Griffin, whom she began dating after her 2019 divorce from Parker. These efforts to keep Griffin accumulated into a fake pregnancy that eventually led to the death of Reagan and Braxton. It's within the zone of reasonable disagreement for the trial court to conclude that this evidence of appellant lying about her status as heir to a syrup company fit within her scheme to keep Griffin and consequently was evidence of her eventual motive to murder Reagan and kidnap Braxton. Here's the Mexican Mafia. At the trial, the state called Angela Pate, whose husband is a distant relative of Griffin. Pate spent a lot of time with the appellant, and appellant told Pate stories about her life. One such story involved appellant's mother, Pryor, who didn't like Wade. According to the appellant, Pryor hired the Mexican Mafia to kill the appellant. Contextually, appellant created the story immediately after she and Griffin got into a tiff at a party and stayed separate for a few days. Pate testified that Wade was, as he was listening to appellant, felt he couldn't leave her with all this going on with her mother, and so they were back together after that. The trial court could have reasonably concluded that this evidence was admissible as evidence of the appellant's motive. As with the other extraneous evidence, this story again exhibits the lengths to which the appellant went to keep Griffin in their relationship. It's within the zone of reasonable disagreement for the trial court to conclude that the evidence the appellant lied about her mother taking a hit out on her with the Mexican Mafia within her scheme to keep Griffin and consequently was evidence of her eventual motive to murder Reagan and kidnap Braxton. Appellant lies when she wants to and was normal. At a trial, the state introduced testimony from Deanne Parker, Hunter Parker's mother, and Bobby Jordan, the interim police chief of the city of Texarkana. On direct examination, the state's Deanna Parker testified. Question: so she knows when she's lying? Answer: absolutely, yes, she does. Jordan testifies. Question: did she seem normal? That's the word they've been using. Did it seem pretty normal to you? Answer: she seemed normal. So the Rule of Appellants Procedures 44.2b provides that an appellant court must disregard non-constitutional errors that does not affect a criminal defendant's substantial rights. Under the rule, an appellate court may not reverse for non-constitutional errors if the court, after examining the record as a whole, has fair assurance that the current error did not have a substantial or injurious effect or influence in determining the jury's verdict. And they're going to cite Garcia versus State and Johnson versus State. Jordan's testimony that the appellant was normal had no effect on the outcome of the trial, and Deanna Parker's testimony that the appellant knows when she is lying was cumulative of a numerous of other instances of evidence that was presented to the jury that showed the appellant lying. There was ample evidence substantiating appellant's guilt regarding her commission of the murders. After examining the record as a whole, we have more than a fair assurance that the omission of both lines of questioning did have a substantial and injurious effect on the jury's verdict. Okay? Having reviewed the evidence that the appellant challenges in her briefing, we conclude that there was no trial court error, or that presuming error, we have more than a fair assurance that the error did not have a substantial or injurious effect on the jury's verdict. Appellant's 8th point of error is overruled. Point of error number 9, Article 37.071, admissibility. The admissibility of extraneous offenses evidence offered at punishment and governed by Code of Criminal Procedures, Article 37.071, Section 2A of the Texas Criminal Code of Procedures, In capital sentencing proceedings, evidence may be presented by the state and the defendant or the defendant's counsel as to any matter that the court deems relevant to sentence, including evidence of the defendant's background or character or the circumstances of the offense that mitigates against the imposition of the death penalty. This article has been construed to afford that the trial judge, while latitude in admitting or excluding evidence of extraneous offenses of the punishment stage of a capital trial, and they're citing Kemp versus State. The trial court's determination of admissibility is evaluated for abuse of discretion, Hughes versus State. In the briefing, appellant contends that the 4 pieces of extraneous offense evidence that were admitted during punishment were in no way relevant to the future danger or special issues. First, appellant challenges the admission of evidence. The appellant sold a former co-worker some bread for the appellant's kids' school fundraiser, but failed to deliver the bread. At punishment, the state introduced evidence from Nona Agassi, appellant's former co-worker at Genesis Prime Care. Agassi testified that she purchased $14 of bread from appellant through the fundraiser, but after appellant was terminated from her job, appellant never delivered Agassi the bread or returned the money. It's within the zone of reasonable disagreement for the trial judge to conclude that evidence that the appellant committed theft was relevant to the future dangerousness in the special issues. Next, the appellant challenges evidence that she claimed to be an heiress of the Morton salt fortune. At trial, the state elicited testimony from Melissa Mason, appellant's former supervisor, who testified about appellant's history of untruthfulness. Appellant claimed to be a Mason, that the appellant was an heiress to the Morton Salt Company, a lie about her family background to an employer also arguably related to future dangerousness and special issues because it fit within the state's theory at trial that the appellant had propensity for not telling the truth due to her psychopathic traits. Hello, that's psychiatric, but psychopathic traits. See also, okay, now. Lastly, appellant challenges evidence that the appellant once cursed at her grandmother as a teenager and evidence that she asked for a bigger desk at work. As before, the admission of evidence is reviewed for harmless error under Rule of Appellant Procedure 44-2B. The gruesome nature of the crime and the state's additional punishment phase evidence provides ample evidence to support that the jury's answers to the special punishment issues. After examining the record of appellant's trial as a whole, we conclude that these passing references did not have a substantial or injurious effect or influence on the jury's verdict of the punishment phase. Having reviewed the challenge evidence in the appellant's briefings, we conclude that there was either no trial court error or that presuming errors, we have more than a fair assurance that the error did not have a substantial or injurious effect on the jury's verdict. Appellant's 9th point of error is overruled. Point of error number 10, excessive extraneous offenses testimony. Appellant's 10th point of error claims that the introduction of excessive extraneous offenses evidence violates her right to a fair trial. But instead of pointing this court to a specific objection of trial regarding excessiveness or case law from the court recognizing the excessiveness is a bar to admissibility of Rule 404B evidence, appellant instead argues that the circumstances of the extraneous offenses evidence from inadequate notice to introduction of impermissible character evidence in the guilt phase to admission of evidence irrelevant to the special issues in penalty phase violates the appellant's right to a fair trial. To preserve errors, a party must let the trial judge know what he wants as well as giving reason for being entitled to relief. Crawford versus State. Appellant never objected to the trial court on the basis of excessiveness. Consequently, error was not preserved for the appellant review. Alternatively, we take appellant's arguments at face value. Having already overruled points of error 7 through 9, appellant's challenge to the circumstances of the extraneous offense evidence in her 10th point of error is without merit. Appellant's 10th point of error is overruled. Point of error number 11. It's a lot. I know it's a lot, guys, but you need to hear it all. So point of error number 11, gender stereotypes. In her 11th point of error, appellant argues that the introduction of evidence invoking gender stereotypes violates due process, but the appellant failed to object on the basis in trial court, so her error was not preserved. There were no objections of trial to any evidence on the basis that the evidence invoked gender stereotypes in violation of due process. Consequently, appellant did not preserve any error for appellant review. Crawford, 710, Southwest 3rd, That's the site. Appellant's 11th point of error is overruled. Omission of other evidence. In her 12th through the 18th points of error, appellant contends that the trial court erred by omitting various pieces of evidence. Specifically, appellant challenges the omission of number 1, record of the 911 call made by Reagan's mother, Jessica Brooks, point of error 12. Number 2, 28 crime scene photographs, point of error 13. Number 3, a video of Reagan's body, points of error 14 and 15. Buddy, hey. Sorry, my little baby dog's over there coughing. All right. You okay? Go get some water. Now, so, okay. Number 3, a video of Reagan's body with points of error 14 and 15. Number 4, 62 photographs of Reagan's autopsy, point of error 16. Number 5, 3 photographs of Braceland's autopsy, point of error 17. And number 6, 2 additional photographs of the deceased infants, which is point of error 18. Appellant also contends that the cumulative effect of the error affects her substantial rights in both the guilt and punishment phases of her trial. We overrule each of the appellant's points. Whoops. All right. Point of error number 12, admissibility of the 911 call. In her 12th point of error, appellant contends that the trial court admitted a recorded 911 call made by the decedent's mother, Jessica Brooks, that served no purpose beyond demonstrating her devastation at the loss of her daughter and unborn granddaughter. Appellant further asserts that the probative value of the 911 call outweighed by its prejudicial effect. We have already rejected a similar challenge in C. Estrada versus State. In Estrada, the appellant challenges the introduction of inflammatory and repetitive 911 recordings Sanchez's family members made upon discovering her body. Because the 911 recording was extremely prejudicial, we explained that evidence such as this is admissible at the guilt phase to provide a framework within the particulars of the state's evidence could be developed even though the evidence did not itself establish any material fact not otherwise proven in the balance of the state's case. In appellant's case, like Estrada, Brooks discovered Reagan's body and reported the crime. Consequently, her recorded 911 call was admissible to provide a framework from within the particulars of the state's evidence could be developed. Appellant's 12th point of error is overruled. Points of error 13, 16 through 18, admissibility of photographs. As other admissibility decisions, we review trial court's decisions to admit and exclude, okay, get down, Jack, to admit and exclude photographs of evidence for abuse discretion. Davey versus State, let's see. The admissibility of photographs over an objection is within the sound discretion of the trial court. A photograph is generally admissible if verbal testimony about the matter depicted in the photograph is admissible. Point of error number 13, crime scene photographs. Rule of evidence 403 provides that the trial court may exclude relevant evidence if its probative value is substantially outweighed by danger of unfair prejudice. In her 13th point of error, appellant argues that the trial court erred in admitting 28 of the 137 crime scene photographs, which were substantially more prejudicial than probative in violation of Rule 403. States Exhibit 236, 38, 240, 242, and 244 offer wide view panoramic shots of the crime scene from different angles. States Exhibit 298 through 300 depict various state or pieces of furniture around the crime scene, as well as the spread of blood and footprints. State Exhibits 298 and 299 especially depict a pillow of towels covered in blood. And States Exhibit 355 through 374 depict injuries inflicted on Reagan's body, as well as the spread of blood around Reagan's body. As we have previously recognized, the photographs in question were probative of the crime scene, and the injuries received by the victim were necessary for the state in developing its case, and because they were not overly gruesome, the photographs did not pose the potential of impressing the jury in some irrational way. Furthermore, the gruesomeness of the crime and merely reflects the action of the defendant is not sufficient reason for excluding the evidence. Consequently, the trial court's decision to admit the crime scene photographs as within the zone of reasonable disagreement and was not an abuse of discretion. We overrule the appellant's 13th point of error. Points error 16 and 17, autopsy photographs. Appellant argues the trial court admitted a lengthy series of photographs that focused on the autopsy process rather than the injuries inflicted in the offense. Autopsy photographs are generally admissible unless they depict mutilation of the victim caused by the autopsy itself. Changes rendered by the autopsy process or minor significant disturbing nature of the photograph is primarily due to the injuries caused by the appellant. The challenge exhibits an appellant's 16th point of error depicted the full extent of Reagan's fatal injuries, including stab wounds, incisions to her face and neck, evidence of possible strangulation, and blunt force skull fractures. That some photographs depict an autopsy process of little importance, these changes were necessary to show the jury the full scope of internal injuries that Reagan suffered from the appellant's assault. This evidence is highly probative in appellant's mental state at the time that she committed the crime, when in turn it's relevant to the future dangerousness in the special issues. See Young versus State. Evidence of such a callous crime might alone support a finding of future dangerousness. Likewise, the challenge exhibits an appellant's 17th point of error depict the injuries that Braxton suffered, including evidence of focal subscapular hemorrhages. The medical examiner testified that this type of injury could be consistent with the infant's mother being hit in the stomach while the infant was still in utero. Furthermore, the photographs depict evidence of hemorrhaging involving the umbilical cord, which could also potentially be caused by some sort of blunt trauma. Like the evidence in the appellant's 16th point of error, this evidence is highly probative of the appellant's mental state at the time she committed the crime, which in turn is relevant to the future dangerousness under special issues. Consequently, the trial court's decision to admit the autopsy photographs was within the zone of reasonable disagreement and was not an abuse of discretion. We overrule the appellant's 16th and 17th points of error. Point of error number 18, additional photographs of Braxton. In her 18th point of error, appellant contends the trial court abused its discretion by omitting 2 photographs of Braxton after she was recovered by paramedics and transported to the hospital. The photographs depicted the as-is state that Braxton was immediately after the appellant's crude C-section and prior to her later autopsy. The trial court could have reasonably concluded that the photographs were relevant to offer a jury comprehensive view of Braxton's condition and assist in its determination that Braxton was born and is alive, and at the time she was kidnapped. As with the autopsy photographs, the trial court could have also reasonably concluded that the additional photographs of Braxton were probative of the appellant's mental state at the time of committing the crime, which in turn is relevant to the future dangerousness of the special issues. Consequently, the trial court's decision to admit the 2 photographs of Braxton at the hospital was within the zone of reasonable disagreement, and it was not an abuse of discretion. We overrule appellant's 18th point of error. Points of error 14 and 15. Admissibility of the video. In her 14th and 15th points of error, appellant argues that the trial court abused its discretion by omitting a graphic video of the decedent's body at the crime scene. Specifically, appellant argues that the trial court erred under the Rule of Evidence 401, point of error 14, and Rule of Evidence 403, point of error 15, by omitting this video. Our analysis in Ripkowski is directly on point. We have held in the past that a videotape and still photographs are not entirely cumulative of each other. A videotape offers a panoramic view of the scene, and that still photographs often do not. We have previously upheld that the omission of videotapes in the crime scene against Rule 403B claims that the evidence was unduly cumulative or caused undue delay. We see little difference between the present situation and the facts of our prior case. Although the appellant also claims unfair prejudice, we find that the videotape simply reflects the gruesomeness of the crime and that it is not sufficient reason for excluding the evidence. In appellant's case, the video evidence in the state's exhibit 250 was the only evidence provided a live panoramic view of the crime scene, including a live visual of the footprints around Reagan's body. Furthermore, the video evidence offered a more comprehensive view of Reagan's injuries and how they looked immediately following the murder and prior to law enforcement's investigation. We conclude that the video evidence was relevant and probative. While we acknowledge the video depicts a gruesome crime scene, the videotape simply reflects the gruesomeness of the crime, and it is not sufficient reason for excluding the evidence. Consequently, the trial court's decision to admit the evidence within the zone of reasonable disagreement was not an abuse of discretion. Cumulative harm. Though it is possible for a number of errors to cumulatively rise to the point that they became harmful, we have never found that non-errors may be, in their cumulative effect, cause error. Blutson versus State. Let's see. Having found no error in the appellant's 12th through the 18th points of error, we cannot conclude that there is a cumulative effect of harm. And number 7, prosecutor statements. In her 19th through her 23rd points of error, appellant challenges the comments made by the prosecutor throughout her trial, as well as testimony elicited by the state through witnesses. Specifically, appellant alleges, number one, the trial court erred by allowing prosecutors to call the appellant's case the worst, which is a point of error, and number 19. And number two, the trial court erred by allowing the state to elicit testimony from witnesses that the case was the worst, point of error number 20 and 21. The trial court erred by allowing the state to refer to the appellant using derogatory names, point of error 22, and the prosecutors committed misconduct by inserting personal knowledge and opinions into the appellant's trial, point of error number 23. Appellant also contends that the cumulative effect of the errors affected her substantial rights in both the guilt and the punishment phases of her trial. We overrule each of these appellant's points of errors. Points of errors, which was 19 through 22. Preservation. Pre-trial, appellant's trial counsel made an oral motion in limine, requesting the state be prohibited as well as any potential witnesses from testifying that this is the worst case I've ever seen or anything along those lines, as well as no mention from the state or any witness offering an opinion that the defendant has shown no remorse or that there's lack of remorse on a couple of grounds. Additionally, appellant's trial counsel filed a pretrial written motion in limine requesting the trial court prohibit the state from engaging in derogatory or dehumanizing name-calling of the appellant. The trial court denied both motions in limine before the start of the appellant's trial. A motion in limine, however, is a preliminary matter and normally preserves nothing for the appellant's review. For error to be preserved with regard to the subject of motion in limine, an objection must be made at the time the subject is raised during the trial. Fuller versus State. The record is devoid of any contemporaneous objections during each of the challenged comments by either the prosecutor or a witness. Consequently, appellant has failed to preserve her complaints for appellant review. Appellant relies on Reagan versus State and Goddard versus State to argue that her pretrial motions in limine were not true motions in limine. In Draughton versus State, the appellant filed a pretrial motion in limine that sought to prevent the state from questioning a prospective juror concerning their attitudes about the death penalty. We conclude that the motion in limine was not a true motion in limine because it did not constitute a request that the admissibility of evidence or disposition of other matter by the court be determined outside the jury's presence. Rather, the motion was sufficient to apprise the trial judge of his complaint and that the judge's adverse ruling upon its authoritative enough to alleviate the necessity for further objections. In Goddard, after the state requested the defense advised the court the defendant intended to testify and outside the presence of the jury objected to the admissibility of the defendant's prior convictions for impeachment purposes. We concluded that the trial court's ruling was not an adverse ruling on a motion in limine, but rather an adverse ruling in the face of specific and timely objections. At 14, this same is not true here. Unlike the motions in Draughton and Gander, appellant's pretrial motions in limine were speculative and did not go to one specific witness or any definitive category of testimony. Rather, they sought to exclude broad swaths of jury arguments and evidence. Without specific timely objections to a jury argument or testimony, it would be impossible for the trial court to know whether such argument or evidence fell within the ambit of the appellant's pretrial motions in limine. Indicating that a ruling on motion in limine is not a final ruling because a trial judge may not be aware of all the pertinent evidence. Moreover, one of the bases for the appellant's pretrial motions in limine, Rule of Evidence 403, which is why contemporaneous objections was necessary. Rule 403 requires the trial court to balance the prohibited value of the evidence to see that the prohibited value is substantially outweighed by one of several enumerated risks. See Texas versus our evidence. A trial court cannot make the determination of pretrial speculating as to the evidence will eventually be introduced and admitted without having the full scope of the evidence before it. We are unpersuaded by appellant's arguments and conclude the appellant's objections were not preserved for the appellant's review. Consequently, we overrule appellant's 19th through 22nd points of error. Points of error 23, personal knowledge or opinions. The proper method of preserving error in cases of prosecutorial misconduct: number one, object on specific grounds, or number two, request an instruction that the jury disregard the comment, and number three, move for mistrials. In her briefing, appellant cites numerous allegedly objectionable questions asked by the state witnesses, but the appellant only cites 6 times a contemporaneous objection was lodged. At some questions, appellant objected did not receive a ruling and failed to object to trial court's refusal to rule. As to the objections, appellant failed to request an instruction that the jury disregard the comment after her objections were sustained, and as to one objection, appellant failed to move for mistrial after the trial court granted a limiting instruction. Consequently, appellant has filed to preserve her complaints for appellate review. We overrule appellant's 23rd point of error. Cumulative errors. Appellant claims that the cumulative errors in her 19th, 22nd, and 23rd points of error harmed her substantial rights during the guilt and penalty phases of her trial. Having found no preserved errors to the appellant's 19th, 22nd, or 23rd points of error, we cannot conclude that there is any cumulative effect of harm. State's penalty phase experts. This is number 8. In her 24th and 25th points of error, appellant contends that the trial court erred by number 1, permitting the state's penalty phase rebuttal experts to conduct unlimited interviews, point of error 24, and permitting the state's penalty phase experts to testify beyond the scope of the appellant's limited waiver of her right against self-incrimination, which is point of error 25. We overrule both points. Point of error 24, scope of examination. In her 24th point of error, appellant specifically argues that the trial court erred by allowing the state's penalty phase rebuttal experts to conduct a standardized psychological assessment, particularly going to psychopathy. If the defendant breaks his silence to speak his own psychiatric expert, if the defendant breaks the silence to speak to his own psychiatric expert and introduces the testimony which is based on such interview, he has constructively taken the stand and waived his Fifth Amendment right to refuse to submit to the state psychiatric experts. Chamberlain versus State. The trial court may compel an examination of the appellant by an expert of the state or court's choosing, and the state may present rebuttal testimony that the expert based upon his examination of the defendant, which is Legrone versus State that they cited. Our prior opinion in Davis is directly on point. There, as here, the appellant sought to challenge the scope of Legrone examination. The subject matter of the defense psychiatric's interview diminishes capacity at the time, mitigating factors that are now relevant in terms of the effects of drugs taken, remorse, and adjustment to incarceration, are factors that could be taken into account in determining future dangerousness. Appellant's attempt to draw a hair-splitting distinction between these topics and state experts' ultimate opinion as to future dangerousness is unintendable and conflicts with the underlying rationale for Legrone rules. If a defendant breaks the silence to speak to his own psychiatric expert and introduces that testimony which is based on such an interview, he has constructively taken the stand and waived his Fifth Amendment right to refuse to submit to the state's psychiatric experts. The focus is that the defendant's choice is to break his silence. The same is true in the appellant's case. The subject matter of the appellant's experts, organic physical defects in her brain, personality disorders, and childhood traumas, are factors that could be taken into account in determining her future dangerousness. Indeed, Dr. Edward Griffin, one of the appellant's experts, testified that the appellant's personality was not characterized by criminal violence, and that given her background, there was no strong basis to predict the probability that the appellant would pose a future danger. As we did in Davis, we declined to draw a hair-splitting distinction between these topics and the state's expert ultimate opinion as to the future dangerousness. The appellant's 24th point of error is overruled. Point error number 25, scope of rebuttal. In her we're on page 64. Woohoo, we're almost done. In her 25th point of error, appellant argues that the trial court erred by permitting Dr. Timothy Proctor, one of the state's rebuttal experts, to testify about, number 1, the results of her PCLR psychopathy checklist he administered to the appellant, including the appellant's above-average score and appellant's purported psychopathic traits and potential full psychopathy. The state's rebuttal testimony is limited to the issues raised by the defense expert in Legrone 942 Southwest 2nd, quoting Sorora 933 Southwest 2nd. The defendant introduces psychiatric evidence in some form. The state may also introduce psychiatric evidence in some form. Let's see. At trial, the appellant introduced testimony from 3 experts: Dr. Nadakara, Dr. Siddhartha, a neurologist, Dr. Griffin, a psychiatrist, and Dr. Elmore, a licensed master social worker. Now, let's see. Dr. Siddhartha testified that the appellant has atrophy in the frontal lobe and the temporal areas of her brain, and further testified, question, in her case, would it be likely because of early interference with the developments? Answer, that would be my speculation, but it would be hard to know, but that's from this imaging it looks like and how long her history is I would that it might be, he stumbles a little bit. That would be my position. Question. I think you described it as something that had been going on for a long time. Answer. That I can definitely say is right. I just can't say if it's developmental, like in utero or not, but it has been going on for a long time. Question. And the dysfunction affects the way Taylor behaves? Answer. 100% yes. Based on her analysis, the appellant's MRI slides, Dr. What's the name of it? See, hang on a minute. Siddhartha, I'm not saying her last name because I really can't say it. Dr. Siddhartha concluded, and it's a question. So this abnormality affects how a person processes the information from receiving it and then acting on it. Answer, that's right. That's the main place where it happens. Question, from what you know about the case, do you find that Taylor has acted dysfunctionally as far as neurology or her brain is concerned? Answer is yes, she has. She has what we call a frontal lobe syndrome. I mean, a lot of features of the frontal lobe dysfunction. Question, and it's actually an organic physical defect in her brain? Answer is yes, correct. He also describes a disinhibition, impulsivity, and confabulations, making up stories or being inconsistent, and testified that the appellant suffered from both conditions as a result of her mental atrophy. Doctors opined that this condition could be mitigated through medications, psychotherapy, group therapy, or supervision. When discussing the potential success of treatment for the patient, he says he testified. Question, how would you help hypothetically? Answer, like I was saying before, usually, these patients need very intensive treatment. Psychopharmacology, which is medication, can be helpful. Individual psychotherapy can be helpful. Usually they need like a comprehensive program, like a cognitive remediation program, and often they need supervision. Question, something like they would have in prison? Answer, supervision for sure. Yes, correct. Question, possible therapeutic resources also, psychiatric resources and things like that? Answer, yes. Question, and they could manage somewhat in a setting like that? Answer, yes. On cross-examination, question, you can't rely on anything she says, can you? Because she's a pathological liar. Answer, I think you have to take with a grain of salt anything she says, that's right. And later, when discussing the fact of the appellant's crime, question, okay, this is the murder lead up. This is stage 33. This is hundreds of pages of her trying to find a victim or hunting places where pregnant women are found. That's some pretty intense planning. That's what I would think someone with these deficits you're talking about would have great difficulty. The way you're talking about Taylor Parker is how she is here. But this is the evidence. So she cannot be that dysfunctional in the frontal lobe if she is able to execute and put together and execute a plan like this? Answer. Well, do you want me to? Question. Yes, that's the question. Answer. Do you want me to respond? So she doesn't have cognitive deficits in the sense that you know in the terms of like specific cognitive. She can plan what she's going to do tomorrow. She can plan things out in the future, but I think what you're showing actually is evidence that frontal lobe degeneration, those people engage in schemes like this when their frontal lobes don't work, and examples of disinhibition, impulsivity, like it's planning illegal behavior, and that's all part of the frontal lobe dysfunction. Dr. Griffin testifies. Okay, question. And I think the kind of wraps this up at least does. Taylor Parker has all the criteria to meet the diagnosis for antisocial personality disorder? The answer was no. Question, does she have all the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder? The answer is no. Does she have this is the question, does she have all the criteria for histrionic personality disorder? The answer is no. The question, and does she have all the criteria for borderline personality disorder? The answer was no. Question, is that why you would use the word condition rather than disorder? Answer, well, yeah, it's considered to be a mental condition because it affects the person, the quality of their life, and the stability of their life, their ability to maintain a relationship, maintain employment sometimes, and those sort of things, but they don't have a full-blown disorder as we diagnose it. When examining all the evidence, Dr. Griffin concludes, question, so based on everything you've looked at, when we're talking about possibility versus probability, and I'm not going to ask you the ultimate question, is there a probability? But in your opinion, in everything that you've looked at, is Taylor Parker a future danger? The answer is, if I said yes, I could not support that on any kind of literature, study, or information that I have. So that means my answer is I cannot predict that she will continue to be dangerous. Now, she will be an aggravation, and she will be manipulative, and she will continue to lie. On cross-examination, Dr. Crippen testifies. Question. So when you say she has traits of antisocial personality disorder, what traits are you seeing specifically that make you think that she has that? Answer. The tendency to be involved in illegal behavior, to run con kind of issues, to claim things, to manipulate regarding finances to her benefit, things that are antisocial or asocial. Question. Okay, you also have said that somebody with antisocial personality disorder, their conduct is knowing that somebody's conduct is wrong, but not caring or wanting a change. Would you say that she falls in that category? The answer, well, I don't know whether she does or not actually, because of the type of personality that she has, and with the pathological lying, people with that condition don't change. They don't change that their own. She goes, they don't change that of their own violation. Question, well, I mean, answer, that doesn't necessarily come under antisocial. The pathological lying is unlikely to change, particularly not without extensive treatment in a setting in which she's not going to find available. Question, she told her corrections officers after she was convicted. Okay, wait a minute. She told a correctional officer after she was convicted, so this would have been in October of 2022, that she had to sit in here for 3 weeks and listen to her be shamed by us with a bunch of lies. That is not somebody that is remorseful or taking responsibility for their actions, in my opinion. Would you agree with that? Answer. Well, that statement certainly doesn't indicate remorse. Question. Right, but I think it also. Answer. That statement is just a lie. Question. Well, sure, but I mean, you're saying you saw her in October 2022. The statement was made in October 2022, so she's telling whatever that she decides to tell that day. Answer, that is, she was a character defect. Answer, that is, she has a character defect, and that's cut from the same piece of cloth. Question, okay. So when you're talking about that she's going to be a manipulative and continue to lie, okay, the situation sets up a very dangerous scenario for other inmates and the correctional officers in a prison setting. Would you not agree with that? Answer, it could. In rebuttal, the state called Dr. Proctor. Dr. Proctor testified that he did not see any evidence of mental disease or defect that would qualify as something that he would include in his report. Dr. Proctor testified. Question, what would an example of something that you would have on occasion, made a note of with the testing of this interview? Answer, sure. Well, like a severe mental disease, schizophrenia is certainly an excellent example. Schizoaffective disorder, which is the type of schizophrenia, could be bipolar disorder. You could have a major depressive disorder with severe and even had what's called psychotic features, which means the person is out of touch with reality. You can have some other conditions that could fall into a mental disease. Mental defect would be something like intellectual disability, which is what we used to call mental retardation, or some kind of severe neurological problem, like a dementia or someone who had a serious head injury that resulted in serious cognitive problems. So that's what I'm referring to there. Question. Okay, and all of those examples that you just gave the jury are things that you have sort of screened for and have seen in the past. You know how to recognize, and that is just not the situation with Taylor Parker. Answer is correct. Dr. Proctor then discussed the standardized tests that he administered to appellant. Based on these tests, Dr. Proctor concluded that the appellant presents with psychopathic traits. Dr. Proctor opines. Here's what he says. Question. Okay, and then the borderline personality. Here's some of the other things, antisocial and histrionic personality traits. We're talking about the PCLR. Again, the presence of pathological lying and manipulatives. Talk about that for just a second. Sure. Well, I mean, part of what came out of the assessment with this, what was this thing called I'm sorry. Sure. Well, I mean, part of what came out of the assessment with this thing called the PCLR, which is the psychopathy checklist, is there were certain traits that, she clearly had, and in particular, the pathological lying and manipulating us are clearly established. This is part of the personality disorder that she has. And she also has related to that what are called antisocial traits, which antisocial isn't like wanting to keep yourself or being shy. It's a tendency to be willing to break the rules, not follow the laws, which she certainly has a history of reckless disregard for others and being irresponsible. lacking remorse, and then this is histrionic piece is the being real, expressive emotionally, and engaging in a lot of attention-seeking behavior that has kind of a dramatic quality to it. Okay, question. And then the jury has heard the malingering. I mean, it's a gross exaggerating or feigning of difficulties. This is what you've identified, some of the factors that were present. What are those factors? Now, this is a long answer right here. And we're on page 71 out of 72, so we're almost through reading the appeal. So, the book we use to diagnose mental problems is called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the Mental Disorders. We call this the DSM for short. The 5th edition text revision is the current one, and of a nation of them, then you should suspect malingering. It does not mean that someone is malingering. It does not mean someone is faking, but it means it's a red flag to consider it. So if you have somebody that's in a medicological context, which means something like a criminal case, like we're involved in, and there's a big discrepancy between the person's claimed stress or disability and the objective findings or observations, which we have here, lots of inconsistencies, my test results that indicated exaggerating or feigning. There's some lack of cooperation during the diagnostic evaluation and in complying with the prescribed treatments. And this again goes to, like the test results, as well giving information that differs from the doctor to doctor. And then finally, if there's a presence of antisocial personality disorder, which I didn't find full antisocial personality disorder, but there's some traits of that. So these things are listed here because they are indicating that I believe malingering should be considered here. And then so I go on to discuss what my thoughts are on that. Analysis. As the record indicates, Dr. Proctor's rebuttal testimony was not outside the scope of the appellant's expert testimonies. Appellant's experts testified the appellant had brain atrophy and traits of several psychiatric disorders. The states rebutted that these conclusives through Dr. Proctor's testimony that ruled out appellant's psychiatric disorders instead attributed the behavior to psychopathy. In fact, Dr. Griffin testified the appellant's antisocial personality disorder traits led her to be involved in illegal behavior, to run a con kind of issues, and to claim things to manipulate regarding finances to her benefit. But Dr. Proctor attributed the same traits to psychopathy through the psychopathy checklist. Based on the testimony in the record, Dr. Proctor's testimony was limited to the issues raised by the defense experts, Legrone versus 942 Southwest 2nd. Because the appellant introduces psychiatric evidence in some form, the state could introduce a psychiatric evidence in some form. Wilkins versus, this is 847 Southwest 2nd. Appellant's 25th point of addiction, appellant's 25th point of error is overruled. Conclusion. Finding no reversible errors, we affirm the judgment of the trial court. And this was dated November the 6th, 2025, when it was published. So there is her appeal. She's not getting out. She's got a capital punishment. She will never get a reversal. I know she can file habeas. She can file all these different appeals, the normal things they always do. But guess what? It's not going to make a difference in her case. So with that, I'm going to have to say goodbye. I'm not going to talk about her anymore. And let's always remember, the important people here are Reagan and Braxton. Those are the people that need to be remembered, not Taylor. Let's forget about Taylor. She's where she needs to be. Let's think about the people, the lives that she took, the way she, and the heinousness in it, and the ridiculousness in it, and the fact that now we have a family over there that are missing a baby and a mom. We have another child over there who does not have a mother now. And I'm so glad to hear that the husband, Homer, has filed a lawsuit against all of those involved, her and the man. And I hope that, I hope that he wins his case. And I'm going to keep up with that. I'm going to keep up with that case to see what happens in that case. It's ongoing right now. There's been nothing published about where it stands. So anyway, with that, I'm going to have to say goodbye, and I'll see you later. I did have something else scheduled for today, but I'm going to put it off for tomorrow, and that's going to be about Chud the Builder. Chud the Builder is now, oh boy, he is not getting out. His bond's been revoked. He's going to be sitting his ass in jail where he needs to be because of his rage-baiting, racism garbage. That's where he needs to be. Anyway, we'll get off of that subject for right now. You all have a wonderful evening. I'm sure I'll see you somewhere out there in Chatland with one of our other friends. Have a good afternoon. Thanks for coming in. All I ask is when you stop by, just either hit the like button on your way in or on your way out. It's kind of important to get those likes up. You can make comments if you enjoyed the content or not. That's fine too. If you don't like hearing about the appeals or knowing why the appeals court affirmed her conviction, that's okay too. I understand it's not for everybody. Anyway, go out there, hug your babies. Have a good afternoon. I'll talk to you later. Bye, guys. Bye.